Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Ті, хто води всяке озброєння, різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
Байрактар. Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 865 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again. And we're hearing the Russians are getting smashed, their bases are exploding, and also it's the best night of the week. It is the Sunday fundraiser night, and it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine, as we have gotten unbelievable news that a major Russian ammunition base within the area of Voronezh has been hit by a Ukrainian drone and exploded catastrophe. Well, you know what? How in the world would I say that? Catastrophically. There we go. How in the world am I forgetting English this early on in the stream? We were able to get every single part of the attack and explosion on film at this point when the stream is running. So we have an incredibly high amount of detail and evidence to show with that explosion. We were also able to get some pretty wild news today out of the port of Bandar Abbas inside of the southern area of Iran, as we were able to see that an Iranian frigate literally just rolled over in port and capsized at its moorings, which is absolutely insane, and it's showing a high amount of ineptitude and also poor planning and poor design by the Iranians as far as their larger naval vessels are concerned. We also got some major news from inside of Ukraine today, as we got to see all kinds of insane clips from the front lines today, showing some pretty wild stuff, including the Ukrainians using an ultralight and a machine gun to shoot down Russian drones that are over the area of the Donetsk Oblast. We have an insanely high amount of news tonight. I mean, it is literally a crazy amount. And not only that, we have a small little piece of news that I'll make sure to bring up right now because so many people are talking about it, and it is on everyone's tongues at the moment about what's going on here. We just got the announcement a few hours ago that the People's Liberation Army will be joining the Belarusian Armed Forces for a joint military exercise in the city of Brest, just 2 miles away from the Polish border and the frontier of NATO. We have an insanely high amount of news to cover tonight, and it is a lot. So stick with me. We're going to be making sure to hop around from our major news topics, and then we're going to be getting on into the Ukrainian front lines and talking about what's going on there in greater detail. But moving on into the major breaking news of the day, we were able to see that a huge Russian ammunition depot within the area of the Voronezh Oblast got blown up. Oh, you know what? I forgot, Mandy. I forgot something, didn't I? I forgot to mention something myself. The Sunday fundraiser is happening tonight. I totally forgot
that's
about
what
that.
I'm talking about.
And how in the world could I forget about that? I saw all the donations rolling in because we just passed $1,000 raised for Nova Ukraine.
Hey, let's go!
Let's go, baby!
In about, what's that, 10 minutes or something like that? Maybe 8 minutes? It's a pretty short amount of time.
It's going rapidly. Tonight's fundraiser is for Nova Ukraine, and of course it is the Sunday night fundraiser. So, of course, the Lee Spring Army has to blow the fundraiser over the goal because that's what we always do, and we're never going to stop doing that until the end of time. But now let's say in the chat if you agree, and let's get that fundraiser up to $3,000 in record time. But moving on from that, and into Voronezh, I want to really quickly put this out there. I didn't geolocate the exact location of this ammunition depot exactly, so I actually put all the markers over the city of Voronezh. We are able to confirm, however, that the explosion was not near the city of Voronezh, but I put the markers here for convenience reasons, so that way when y'all look for it, considering that y'all are hearing a massive ammo explosion happen in Voronezh, y'all just have to look for the city of Voronezh, and then you have all the markers right there. But moving on into our first clip, this one was fairly new. We got to see the Ukrainian drone that actually struck the ammo depot, and it was filmed by just a random Russian getting out of their house in the morning and hearing the little Ukrainian drone on its way to victory, on its way to change history for the large part. Here's the clip.
The mad mosquito making its way to its target.
Oh.
Oh, wow, that's a fast mosquito.
Dude, that thing went... It's like, dang, dude, that thing is speeding. But not only is it speeding, it's causing the biggest explosion that we have ever seen in the war. And we were able to see that right here. Check this out. this is the first video, as far as our timetable goes, this was the first video ever recorded post-explosion. So we had the video of the drone flying towards the ammunition depot, and then we had the video of the ammunition depot right after it's exploded. We can tell that it just exploded because there was a mushroom cloud that was created that still was rising at the point this video was being filmed, showing us that this explosion was very fresh at the time of filming. You can actually see it right there. That is the top of the mushroom cloud right up there. And you can actually see how it kind of tapers off to a mushroom cloud. Now, a lot of people have said, Forcer, this is from the video earlier today, that's not a mushroom cloud because it's not shaped like a mushroom. Well, let me tell y'all something. Mushroom clouds aren't going to be shaped perfectly. I know. Many people go to the restaurants and they always want their hamburgers to look the exact same way, the exact same time. Sadly, Gordon Ramsay ain't out here cooking up ammunition dump explosions. So mushroom clouds do look a little different. However, this is a mushroom cloud by all means. Don't get me wrong. We can see that it has the thermal updraft right here and then the plume at the top, clearly denoting that this is a mushroom cloud if there ever was one. And I gotta tell you, the Russians have to be learning a lot about the different kinds of appearances that a mushroom cloud can bring on. Because it is truly a sight to behold. We can see the smoke still rising, and we can actually see, oh, look at that! Another building exploded inside of the ammo depot. So it looks as though the secondary explosions were already beginning, even at this point.
Oh, Bliat. We don't have ammo to begin with, and now they blow up what we have left, Bliat. This is not going well.
Suka, Bliat, and then we just have this woman here who's very concerned, apparently, as the mushroom cloud continues to rise, and then the video loops. Now, it's time for us to go a few hours into the future, a little bit later on in the day, as we got to see that more videos were coming out of just the unbelievable amount of explosions that were coming out of this depot. It went on for hours. We still believe that this is actually going on right now and exploding. It's just that footage is largely ended because it's nighttime and people aren't out really recording this much. But still, here's the clip of the endless explosions coming from the ammo depot as it continues to burn and more ammunition continues to succumb to the flames.
Man, I know the Russians were hoping this was the North Korean ammunition because, you know, that ammunition has an extremely high failure rate. There was just a video that came out yesterday showing the North Korean ammo failing on the Russians, blowing up right in their face. So, I mean, I really doubt this is the North Korean ammo, but that would be like the best case scenario for the Russians at this point.
Man, but the best case scenario for Ukraine is that this is all pure, raw Russian ammunition that's blowing up, because then that means the Russians are going to be going, okay, crack out the North Korean. Dude, the Russians sit there and they pick artillery shells like people pick cigars, man. They're like, would they want some classic Russian, or would I like a Korean? Blade. That's like, the Koreans, they just don't have nice, consistent burn, blade. You know what I mean? But the Russian one burns quite nicely, like these right here, blade.
Isn't it shocking that ammunition can be worse than the Russian-made stuff? Like, the North Korean stuff is so bad, it makes the Russian stuff look like it's, like, quality.
That is really bad when you think about it, man, because the dead rate in Russian ammo is pretty freaking high. But this isn't the only video that we have. This is not it. We have another. This one right here, which actually came from a Russian that was driving around in the area, and we actually got to see from a distance how big this explosion really had become, and also how much smoke was being thrown up from the never-ending secondary explosions that were going on in the ammunition depot for hours. So here's the clip. It looks like a sandstorm.
Kind of does.
Да прилетело 3 беспилотников. Вован видел. Его сбило нахуй. Убивало в доме.
We are driving towards the explosion. It's looking pretty bad, blade.
Dude, this guy's about to break out into the, oh man, I'm telling you, I get no respect on our blade.
Жопа, короче.
Жопа.
Твою ж мать. Или никого. Вообще.
That dude needs to eat some meat. Did you see his arms?
Dude, he's got that North Korean in the gulag kind of look. You know what I mean? Like he's got that decreased calorie diet kind of a look. That kind of look that says, where are your Russian government benefits? Shouldn't you be eating? He ain't eating though.
Shit. Короче, ладно.
And then we have a second clip right over here. This one's very similar to the one from earlier. This one also clearly shows you the mushroom cloud as it was forming from the initial explosion. But what's a little weird is that it's at a slightly different angle than our original first video. Oh, you see the mushroom cloud right there. We can see the truck that was actually there earlier in the first video.
Километров за 10. Сюда даже прилетела одна хуйня.
And we see that secondary explosion again. This time, you have to tilt your head sideways to see it, which is what the Russians were doing when they saw that a single Ukrainian drone created one of the largest ammo depot explosions in the entire war. They all tilted their head as well and went, what the hell? Or, what the shell blade? But anyways, that's the end of that clip right there. Very nice to see that they were able to decisively hit this ammunition depot and cause a serious amount of damage. Now, from what we know, this ammunition depot was probably housing hundreds, if not thousands of tons of ammunition, which has been exploding over the course of an entire day. And going off of that, we understand that the Russians may be running out of ammunition, at least within this local area, while this explosion continues. And a lot of people are wondering, what in the world will be going on with that? Will that have a major impact on Russian logistics, at least within the northern area of the front line? Or will it lead to a complete crumbling? We do know that it's going to have an effect. We just don't know the severity of the effect at the moment. And sadly, we haven't really been able to compute that either, because we do not know how tied into the current logistical framework this ammunition depot was. But we do know that the Russians will have a lot less ammunition to pull from, particularly within the area of the northern front line, in between Svatove and Kupyansk, as this was positioned in the oblast from what we know around Pokhdorensky, which is actually incredibly close to Olkhovatka, where another ammunition depot explosion had occurred a little while ago. This means that these Russian forces will be dealing with even less available ammunition, meaning that their frontline actions may be greatly hindered, and this would also shift, for a temporary time, the battlefield initiative completely over to Ukraine, as they will be having a pretty much voluminous and ceaseless end of ammunition compared to the Russians on the other side, which are dealing with scraps at the moment due to the never-ending ammunition depot explosions happening within the area of southwestern Voronezh. But we've been able to hear something else very interesting about what's going on with the axis of evil, for the large part, that many people have started to call it out here in the world, which really consists of the Iranians, North Korea, China, Russia, and a few other smaller countries that really even aren't worth an honorable mention. But nevertheless, we have heard something that is pretty shocking today about the Chinese that pertains directly to NATO and the Ukraine war. That is something that you don't hear a lot. Usually we'll talk about China on this channel, in particular about what's going on in the South China Sea or East Asia, or hell, even in the Yellow Sea. We usually talk about stuff like that. But today, China is actually bringing itself directly into the European sphere and is becoming a topic that we have to talk about in relation to what's going on with NATO and what's going on with Belarus in particular. According to information that we have been able to get, the People's Liberation Army, which is the Army of the People's Liberation Army, we'll get into the naming convention thing here in a second so I can explain how that really makes sense, although it doesn't. But nevertheless, the People's Liberation Army has announced today that they will be conducting a joint military exercise with the Belarusian armed forces in the city of Brest. According to their direct statement, it is for training and drills in counter-terrorism operations, or counterinsurgency as it's called, which is also called COIN. They apparently will be there to conduct some drills in that regard, according to the official public statements that we've gotten. What is very interesting about that is that the city of Brest is right along the Polish-Belarusian border. it is literally at the farthest, and let me make sure to measure this for y'all. This is the closest that the city of Brest right there gets to the Polish border, at least within this particular area. And that is less than 1 mile away from the Polish border, at the closest that these Chinese forces may be getting. Now, that's brought up a lot of questions, and a lot of people are wondering why in the world is China sending armed forces into Belarus to conduct counterterrorism training with Belarus. We don't really have a lot of statements and a lot of information. Well, that's at least the public level. I'll get into the exact details and information that we've been able to acquire right before the stream. But a lot of people are talking about this and wondering, is this a major deal or is it not a major deal? And a lot of people have been weighing in that they think that this is not good at all, and it's showing that the Chinese are trying to get heavily involved even in the far reaches of Eastern Europe, and certainly trying to make sure to spread their spread their reach, or spread their arms more so, not just to reach into being a regional power, but China is finally taking some of those smaller moves like this little military drill to show that they're starting to become an emerging world power, or a world superpower of a sort. And a lot of people have been weighing in on this and saying whether they think this is a very concerning thing or not so much. And Matthew, what are people thinking about it, and what are you thinking about as well? Do you think this really is concerning, or do you think not so much?
So it looks like 54% of the audience said, yes, this is not good at all. It's a major deal. While 21% said, no, it's only a minor escalation. And 18% said, I really need more intel first before making a conclusion. And on this one, it sounds like it could be pretty bad, because we don't know the exact amount of troops it is, but it's really just a symbolism behind it, that the Chinese troops are joining in with Belarus, which is, once again, Putin's lapdog country. It's at Putin's behest what is done in Belarus. So this indicates that the Chinese are very closely allied with Belarus and also Putin as well, for them to be sending troops to the Polish border like that. There's no other reason except to try to intimidate the West. Otherwise, why are the Chinese sending troops there to that country? They have no business there. They have no reason to be there whatsoever. So, to me, it looks like pure intimidation, and that's not good. And in my opinion, the West should prepare some type of response to at least sort of escalate things on our side to let the Chinese know that we're not going to let stuff like this start happening without repercussions. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, this is a bit of a major deal on a diplomatic level, but on a military level, it's not a major deal at all. I'll quickly explain why, and I'll quickly explain a lot of the information that we got right before the stream, because I actually did a lot of quick reading on this. Matthew can tell y'all literally about 2 minutes before we went live to try and make sure that we had all the details down and I could give y'all a fair analysis on what we're looking at. Now, with the Chinese involvement in foreign military drills, we do understand that the Chinese have started to really try and get their sea legs and try and conduct foreign operations or foreign missions around the world to try and build friendship with other nations. Usually we've seen that some of these nations are actually incredibly odd. For example, Chinese liaison forces from the People's Liberation Army were actually transported all the way to Canada to conduct joint military drills with the Canadian Army, which was incredibly weird, but that happened a couple of years ago. We have also seen that in the past, the People's Liberation Army has also conducted liaison operations and missions with the United States Marine Corps inside of the area of the western, well, really the eastern, well, no, for us it would be the Western Pacific. For China, it would be more so their eastern seas. But nevertheless, they did conduct some small joint drills in the past together, even with the United States. However, the way that the Chinese are starting to operate nowadays, that will probably never happen again, where there is any kind of a joint military exercise in between any U.S. forces and the People's Liberation Army. But I would like to make it very clear how the Chinese are conducting these kinds of missions. They aren't sending an entire army to Belarus, and they haven't sent an entire army to Canada, and they didn't send an entire army to operate with the United States of America. What they'll send is what I'm calling a liaison force, or more so a small little group. That's the best way to explain it. These groups are usually smaller than a company-sized element, meaning less than 100 guys, and usually are just there to watch someone else do something and then take down notes. That's what they did with the Canadians for the large part. That's kind of what they did with the United States as well, to a little degree. And then that's what we believe they're going to be doing with the Belarusians, because one bit of key critical information that we got before we got on air is that a single Y-20 transported the entire Chinese force from China to Belarus in one flight. And this is something that is very important to note, is that the Y-20, while being a somewhat larger stratolift aircraft, if you want to call it that, it's not that big in the big picture. This aircraft can only carry, from what we can assume, from what we were able to find out, about 70 guys. Loading the plane pretty much completely down in terms of trying to get as many people in as possible, maybe about 70 people, and that's going to be a little bit cramped. That's not really allowing for a lot of additional room for supplies or any additional equipment. Even light vehicles would be pretty hard to fit in this aircraft at this point with about 70 guys inside of it. So whatever this force is, we know that it's smaller than 70 Chinese soldiers. We also know that any kind of equipment or provisions that they have are either being provided to them by the Belarusians, or they brought it, meaning that their contingent of soldiers is now drastically decreased because they had to make room inside of the aircraft to carry the supplies instead of carrying soldiers, meaning that there may only be about 40 to 30 Chinese soldiers that have arrived in the city of Brest on this J-20, along with additional supplies and provisions to keep them there for some time. So going off of this, we know that there is not a large Chinese contingent here, and we want to make sure to allay those fears because we already have heard that many channels, well, not many, but a few, are already making it sound like there are hundreds of thousands of Chinese forces on the Polish border and they're getting ready to invade and take over the Suwalki Gap. That is not going to be happening. What these little Chinese soldiers are doing, what these little pretty much Chinese guys are doing in Brest, is that they're just going to be watching the Belarusians conduct training for counterterrorism operations. They're going to write down notes, they're going to give some advice, and then they're going to go home. That's largely what this is. It's not to try and have an actual armed presence on the Polish-Belarusian border. It's more so to try and build up a friendship with Belarus. Because many of y'all have already seen, and we've of course been observing and noting this quite heavily throughout the war, that the Chinese are drawing the Russians economically so deep into the Chinese economical sphere, there's no way for Russia to leave, and there's no way for Russia to try and break free of it either. So going off of that, we know that the Chinese are trying to start building their sphere of influence, not only in the area of the Indian Ocean, but also in the area of Asia at large, maybe even including Central Asia in the future as a part of the One Belt, One Road program. But Belarus is the farthest west that China can go, where it's not a NATO-aligned country that could easily be pulled into the fold for the People's Republic of China. And so for that reason, they want to start conducting little diplomatic missions with the Belarusians to show that they have some of their best interest in mind and that they're willing to help them out and be a good citizen, good neighbor kind of a country to Belarus. And that's what this little mission of the Chinese is more so revolving around. It's not about raw military presence. It's more so about drawing Belarus on into the same fold that the Russians are in at this point, which is starting to become a Chinese-aligned fold. So I would say that
Also, real quick, I saw in the live chat here from Jay Bagwell, he brought up a different point. He said that Chinese flight sounds like a straight-up smuggling operation to avoid sanctions. I guess, you know, I typically look at things at face value. So when the reports say that it's going in there to bring in the troops to do the training, I assume that. But that's a really good point, Jay, because it could have a secondary motive behind it, which it could be bringing in supplies, because that would be a really sneaky way to do it. And that would kind of be along the lines of what China tries to do by not directly getting involved by saying, hey, look, here's all the Chinese equipment going to Russia, because obviously that would violate the sanctions. But they might send it in via that secondary means, like under the cover of a military exercise, and actually send stuff in. So that's a good point.
That is a good point, and its capacity is around 145,000 pounds. So it can carry a pretty decent amount of cargo if it wanted to. And so that is actually an interesting idea, Jay. It could just be that there is no contingent that's even arriving in Belarus. This is just a way to drop off some smaller amounts of equipment that maybe the Russians would like to have. Who knows what it could be. Sadly, I wouldn't be able to do any dimension checking really quickly, because one thing I was thinking right off the bat when you said that is maybe the Chinese are sending targeting and acquisition radar systems to Russia, considering that those are starting to run in very short supply, and that would be the kind of rarer system that would make it worthwhile to maybe send an aircraft really quickly. But then again, my thought is that if they're trying to circumvent sanctions on the Russians, wouldn't because from what I know, it landed at an airport nearby to Brest, from what I know. And let me see if I can find one around the area. Let's see, I believe it's actually this one. I believe they landed at the Brest airport, and then they started to offload whatever was on the aircraft. Instead of landing right at the Polish border, where it could be pretty easy if a NATO surveillance drone was on the other side of the border to spot that plane landing and then keep an eye on it and see where they offload. I feel like it would have been a lot easier for the Chinese to just send that in and have the aircraft landed inside the Russian Federation. Or they could be doing a very interesting ruse or a ploy where things are a lot more complicated than they need to be, just to try and make sure to throw off the scent of what they're actually doing. But that's still a very interesting idea. But nevertheless, I would say, regardless of what this is, it probably isn't that major of an ordeal. The Y-20, if it can carry a targeting or an acquisition radar for a surface-to-air missile system, can probably only carry one of them at a time, so it's probably not carrying two of them. Because the Y-20 is quite small in reality compared to even other kinds of stratolift aircraft here in the West, like the C-17 Globemaster. The Y-20 is considerably smaller. But one thing that's really wild about Chinese aviation and the Chinese aviation industry is that the nickname for the Y-20 in China is actually Chubby Girl, because it's such a wide-bodied plane compared to what they're used to, which is really bizarre because compared to a C-17 Globemaster, this thing is actually like a mid-sized fuselage. Let me really quickly show y'all a C-17 Globemaster to give y'all an idea of American stratolift capabilities versus a Chinese stratolift capability.
Man, what's up with the people like China calling stuff like Chubby Girl? Like the United States called one of the atomic bombs like Fat Man, and then they called one Little Boy. It's like, what's up with this like naming conventions that some countries use like that?
Man, I have no idea, man. It really is bizarre. Also, one thing that's really interesting to see on the aircraft, just because I'll have y'all know, I have been trying to learn a little bit of limited Chinese, and this actually says right here, Chinese. These two little characters right here on the front actually say China. And then this back part right here actually says, I think something along the lines of Air Force or something like that. It's like China Air Army or something like that. Well, hang on. Let me see here. I think that's actually Luchun, which would be a China Army. So that's kind of cool to see. I actually have not been able to read Chinese for an incredibly long time, or Mandarin if you want to call it that. But still pretty cool to see that and be able to actually read it. But nevertheless,
I think it says something along the lines of build fast, break fast, China.
No, man, build fast, break faster. Like that's something along those lines. But this is the C-17 as a direct comparison to the Y-20, because the Y-20 is supposed to be China's version of a C-17 and kind of fill the same role. And just to give you all an idea of the capacity on a C-17 Globemaster, to give you all an idea of the airlift abilities that we have, the C-17 has a capacity of 170,900 pounds, while the J-20 pictured here, if I can get out of that picture, and let me go down here, has a capacity of 145,000 pounds. So it's actually a decent bit less, about 40,000 pounds less. So going off of that, maybe they're transporting equipment. If anything, it's also, really quickly, let me get you all the dimensions of the length and width and everything too. The length of the C-17 Globemaster is 174 feet. The length of the Y-20 is 154. So it's about 20 feet shorter, which is fairly scrunched. The wingspan is 164 feet, while the wingspan on the C-17 is 169. So while the Y-20's fuselage is very scrunched compared to the C-17, it has a pretty comparable wingspan, funnily enough. But nevertheless, I believe that this isn't that big of a deal. Even if they are bringing in, to get back around to the final conclusion, even if they are bringing in some kind of a targeting or an acquisition radar for an S-300 or an S-400, it is only one targeting acquisition radar, and that probably won't be doing Russia too much good in the long run. If it's a small liaison team of Chinese soldiers that are moving into Belarus, I don't really think there's a major danger there either. As we already know, that Belarus is a minor member of the major Russian, well, not the major, but the smaller Russian sphere, much like several other countries are. And so for that reason, if Russia is going the way of China, Belarus was always going to go the way of China at that point. So China sending a small liaison team to try and build up a diplomatic rapport with Belarus is more so of a formality than actually trying to pull Belarus one way or the other. As we all clearly know, I think without a doubt, Belarus was never going to become Western or NATO. It was clearly going to be within the Russian sphere well on into the foreseeable future. And so the Chinese trying to make sure that that happens isn't really anything too concerning or really rocking the boat all that much. But with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, at least in my opinion, as the fundraiser hits a whopping $2,117. Unbelievable. We are getting incredibly
It's
close.
running off the rails, man. This fundraiser's going crazy.
Man, we are getting really close to the fundraiser goal, man. I think we're going to hit it here really soon, probably before the hour's over. But still, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can about what's going on with the Chinese in Brest. And I gotta say, Matthew, that's very weird, man, that the Chinese are going to Brest. It just makes me wonder, do they like Brest? I don't know. We'll have to find that out later.
Oh.
But moving on from that and on down into Iran, because this is also a pretty crazy story from today. Inside of Iran, many of y'all will know that there is a government called the Islamic Republic of Iran, which also does a whole bunch of military things, usually covert inside of the area of the Middle East, usually trying to fund and support Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, among many other groups which are anti-Western. They also have their own actual armed force, and one of those is actually the Iranian Navy, which many people will be like, wow, they have a Navy? I thought they just had nothing but speedboats. And, well, you would be right. It's almost all speedboats, but here is the symbol of the Iranian Navy, made in Microsoft Paint. It's a really nice symbol, and it makes me think that these have to be some very well-seasoned sailors that are inside of the Iranian Navy, or as they call it, the Islamic Republic of Iran Navy. But nevertheless, they have 7 frigates, 5 corvettes, 20 fast attack craft, which are kind of boats for the most part, 6 patrol boats, 31 amphibious ships, 17 auxiliaries, 19 subs, and 54 aircraft in the entire freaking Navy. It's a huge Navy by all means. But nevertheless, I want to make sure to show y'all the list of current ships that are in their Navy, because there is this nice little class right here, the Mooj class. This one right here. That looks really cool, doesn't it, y'all? I mean, like, that ship looks like it could take on the world. It is actually
What's the catch?
Well, really quickly, I was actually going to get around to something here, Matthew, because this is the interesting catch. This one right here is actually what the Mooj class is built off of. This is the older Alvin class, and this is a pretty big mainstay of the Iranian Navy. But the problem is that's getting a little bit outdated technologically, and so the Iranians have to find a way to update this thing and make it viable in a modern war space. And so they decided to upgrade it by adding a whole bunch of extra equipment and sensor systems to the superstructure and pretty much rebuild the thing from the, I forgot what this is. If we had Walter E. Lakota here right now, he would be able to tell us the top of the hull right here, pretty much from there up. The entire superstructure was redone. Thing is that it added weight. And this has been a bit of a problem for these classes of vessels in the Mooj class. One of these, called the Iris Sahand, actually ended up showing that it's a little bit too top-heavy, while Underwater Comms throws in a 250 to the fundraiser. Absolutely
let's
killing
go.
it. But moving us on into Bandar Abbas, there's a little important thing that I have to point out here as well. The entire Iranian Navy is in Bandar Abbas, within this area right here. Pretty much all of their major surface vessels are here at the moment, even right now. But that's still completely beyond the point. I need to show y'all what happened today to the Mooj class Iris Sahand, which ended up capsizing while just sitting at port. There it is. And there it is after it completely settled.
Wait, what? Wait a minute, am I seeing this right?
Yeah, you're seeing it right.
Whoa. I did not see this photo today, I'll be honest with you. This is a shock. This is the first time I'm seeing it. That is the whole boat capsized over?
The boat literally, well, and I'm not joking, let me explain. It is a perfect, like you can see in this picture here, Matthew, the water is literally perfectly still. Nothing is rocking this vessel. It was moored to another vessel alongside it, and out of the blue, in the middle of the day, the ship just rolled over and capsized. Out of the blue.
What? How the hell did that even happen? What, somebody like run to the other side of the ship and like tipped or something?
We have no idea. We don't know why it capsized like this, but it capsized so soundly that it actually is resting right now on the superstructure. The superstructure is underwater, and it's flipped over so hard that you can actually see the protrusion on the bottom of the vessel that is made for the sonar on the ship. Like, you can actually
God.
see it. Like, you would never see that in actual service on most naval vessels, because some of them, if they don't have a more bulbous shaped bow, which sometimes fits a sonar inside of it, usually it's in this giant bulbous fixture on the bottom of the hull. So you are literally seeing the bottom of the ship right there, tipped upwards. Now, the damage to the ship is going to be incredibly severe. If they even put all of their industrial efforts towards fixing this vessel, it may take months or about a year to fix the damage that has probably been caused to the superstructure and the ship as a whole, because everything inside that was electronic has ended up getting corroded by seawater, and the entire ship is practically awash at this point. But let's see here. Bobby Caralfa said, that is not a sonar. Please tell me what it is then, because I would like to know, because I've always been told that those were the installations for the sonars. But nevertheless, this ship has ended up taking a massive loss today. We can actually see, somehow, some way, Wikipedia has already updated that the Iris Sahand has capsized at port. No, like,
Man, that's
no
crazy.
joke.
It says fate awaited. It's like, dude, the fate is the thing's on the side and it's like flooded. That's the fate.
But let me see if I can get y'all. Here's an actual picture of the Sahand itself after refit in 2018, and then it just rolled over and capsized today. Now, one thing that could have happened, there's a couple of things that I could come up with off the top of my head. It could have been that they were trying to load on cargo, although it's nowhere near an area to load cargo in this clip, and it ended up setting a bit of the weight off. It started to take on a list, and then the list became so severe that it literally just rolled over and capsized while in port. Another one that I'm thinking is a lot more likely is that the hull, as you can see, the hull doesn't look like it's been maintained that well. There may have been a small fissure that was created in the hull, which turned into a rupture, and the ship started taking on water, and because it was so top heavy, it easily capsized in port completely and did not rest on an even keel, which is a major part about how these kinds of vessels function. And also, I'm seeing Bobby Caralfa say stabilization of the ship to help cut through the ocean. I'm doubting that a little, because stabilizers are usually on the side. They're not on the bottom, but let me check and see if I can find anything about that. So let's see here. Let's see, it has a ASR long-range radar. It actually has some chaff launchers on board, which is a little interesting, because you wouldn't expect that for the Iranian Navy. But let me see here. Let's see, defense weapon. Let's see, could destroy. One second, I want to make sure to read a little bit about this vessel. Domestically developed. Explained the Iranian. Okay, so. Oh no, man! Look, they already updated Wikipedia and everything with all the information on what happened today. Like, they are quick on Wikipedia, no joke. Like, they actually are incredibly quick with updating this stuff.
Man, they're faster than the Twitter reporters sometimes.
Man, I'm telling you, man, like, they are quick. Also, let's see. Hokey Redneck said most warships don't have stabilizers. That's what I was thinking. Stabilizers are usually for ships like cruise ships, ocean liners, things like that. Let's see here. I'm trying to see if anyone has any additional information about that bulb on the bottom of the hull. Usually on a vessel of war, that would usually be some kind of a sonar buoy, because I believe even Fletcher-class destroyers had something along those lines. At least some of the refit ones did. If anyone knows anything maritime, please let me know if Bobby Caralfa is correct or if it's something different, because now I'm a little bit confused about what that is as well. But I was told that that was a sonar that was mounted inside the bottom of the vessel. And let's see, Haviland Tuff said it helps the ship move through the water more effectively. Huh, that's interesting. Let's see. Bulbous bow. Let's see here. Truck nuts. Okay. Hydrophone. Paddington, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking it was probably a hydrophone or some sort of a sonar. And let's see. Staying said usually sonar. The hull is too narrow for its height. It really is. But let's see here. Let's see. Or the flare or the bulb. Okay, so thank you, Gary. So it does seem as though, well, it actually seems like everyone's half and half right now. It's either a sonar that is mounted on the bottom of the vessel, or it's some kind of a counterweight or some kind of a special addition to make sure that it can move through the water a lot more efficiently. One or the other. But nevertheless, that is on the very bottom of the vessel. I mean, that's literally pretty much on the ship's backbone. So for you to be able to see that at all, you know that the ship's pretty much capsized completely. They say that there's a chance of repairing this thing, or getting it back in the way. getting it back into service, but I'm having a feeling that that's probably not likely. A ship that's been this badly damaged, especially considering that the superstructure, which is incredibly thin, is taking the entire weight of the vessel currently on the bottom of the harbor. The superstructure is probably completely destroyed on one side. Everything else inside the ship will be corroded by the time that they refloat the vessel, and so it may be a complete loss. Also, to put this into perspective as well, back after the attack on Pearl Harbor, there was a massive operation to try and refloat pretty much the entirety of the United States Navy, and even at that, some vessels were not refloated. For example, the USS Arizona, because it was so thoroughly destroyed by its forward magazine explosion that they decided it wouldn't be worth it to refloat it or even repair it because the ship was practically a complete loss. Or, for example, on the other side of the island, the USS Utah, which had rolled over pretty much completely and was practically unsalvageable. And so they decided that it wouldn't be worthwhile to also recover that battleship either, which is pretty much unsung and unheard of compared to the USS Arizona. But nevertheless, once a ship rolls over so severely that it's pretty much sitting on its superstructure in the water, it is going to be pretty hard to recover or practically unsalvageable. Although the salvage efforts did recover one battleship like that at Pearl Harbor, it wasn't incredibly common for them to do that, like you can see with the USS Utah. But nevertheless, I hope that does address that the best I can about the whole Iranian Navy story today. It is absolutely nuts to just watch a ship just randomly capsize in a harbor like that, and it really shows the joke that the Iranian military is and the kind of major flaws that they will allow to be built into their vessels in the sense of trying to look modern and up to speed with every other nation around the world. It's nothing more than for show for the large part. Also, Matthew, another thing I just realized is that the way that this thing capsized, I'm betting you that that massive counterweight on the bottom of the ship dug into the side of this one, because look how close it was when it was capsizing. It had to have scraped the actual side of the hull of this vessel right here.
It could have. Also, I saw Rob Eisman saying the live chat. He said that ship was side to side of the ship next to it in advance, and they knew it was going to be capsized, and the ship next to it is tilted as well. I was noticing that in the photo as well. That one right there that's like attached to or whatever, it's definitely tilting over to the left or the right, whichever way you're looking at it. So it's leaning as well. Also, I saw someone else. I think it was Roger H. He said, "What is a large ship-looking object sitting behind the sunken ship?" I think this is really a large, like maybe a barge or something like that. What is it?
I think actually what that looks like it is the bow of some kind of a vessel. A commercial vessel of an incredibly large size. This port looks like hell, dude, the way they have it set up, because
oh yeah,
it looks like they're just parallel parking crap at this point, like this frigate was. Like, it's like, what is this place? Because look at this. Let me show y'all Bandar Abbas again in the naval moorings right here. Look at how they have these ships set up, and these are ships that are actually being used right now in the Iranian Navy. Like, this is it. And then come over here, and this is the commercial side of things. Look at that. Like, that looks crazy. So let me take y'all over here really quickly. I'll take y'all to Biloxi. There's a lot of shrimp boats in Biloxi. So notice how they actually moor the vessels here. There's a lot of them, and they're almost parallel parked, but they're set up in a way where you can actually get the ships out to sea if you wanted to quickly. Dang!
Hey, we just hit the goal!
Let's go, baby!
That's it!
We did it, baby! We hit the fundraiser goal, and we're absolutely killing it. We hit
Smashing.
$3,120 in 56 minutes. A huge shout out to everyone who's been throwing in unbelievable support tonight, and also smaller amounts of support, because every single one of y'all has come together to be able to make it possible for us to hit the fundraiser goal again. The Lee Spring Army will never die, and every single weekend we continue to show the Russian Federation that the Western world is united in its support for Ukraine and making sure to support its own Western interests by making sure that these fundraisers succeed each and every night. They are a complete testament of the raw and sheer willpower that the Lee Spring Army has behind it, and the raw and sheer willpower that will eventually overcome and win against the axis of evil around the entirety of the world. Absolutely incredible to see, and a huge thanks to all of y'all for fundraising to that point. Y'all can still continue to fundraise if y'all want to, but that is absolutely amazing to see. And if you don't want to continue to fundraise tonight, that's perfectly fine. We've already hit the goal, so a lot of people can sit back and take it easy. But if you want this fundraiser to hit great heights, you can continue to support it, because there is no limit at this point. It can keep on going higher and higher, and nothing will really stop it. But nevertheless, we also got a picture of the sunken frigate right here, and we were able to see a good picture of it from the side. And also, Matthew, isn't that thing kind of sitting a little high above the waterline?
Maybe it's just the way they painted the hull or something like that. But I'll be honest with you, it's actually a pretty big vessel. Like, I know it's probably not the biggest vessel out there, but it looks sizable just from this picture.
Yeah, and it's completely sideways right now too in that port. So it looks like
How's it even really fit in that spot? Like that spot that it's in really doesn't look big enough to really be like, that whole ship is sideways there. Like, is it just an optical illusion, or where's the rest of the ship at?
It's back behind it. I don't really know how this is working in this port because this picture is honestly like one of those optical illusion tricks where you're trying to figure out what you're looking at. But the entire thing did capsize and roll over. So with that, I hope we addressed that whole story well. Pretty wild to see. Maybe we'll see more stuff like that in the future. Who knows? But with that, we're now going to be moving on out of Iran, and we're going to be moving back on towards Ukraine, because we still have a lot of big news to cover. And before we do, we have been able to hear that there has been a leaked report that says more Russian soldiers have been killed in Ukraine than previously reported. And a lot of people have been putting in their thoughts on this, because right now this is nothing more than a rumor, and we haven't been able to confirm the validity of that information or deny it as unfactual. So at the moment, it's open to discussion about whether this report is true or not, because we really have no good ways to tell at the moment. A lot of people are saying that the number lost was shocking. Some people are saying that the number lost was actually highly expected. Some people are saying I don't feel any which way, and some people are a little bit unsure and undecided about this information that came out. But Matthew, tell everyone a little bit about what came out today, this rumored casualty report, and also what are people thinking about it, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so just for some backstory, we got a post from the Kyiv Independent, and it says leaked documents suggest that more Russians killed in Ukraine than previously thought. And between 462,000 to 728,000 Russian soldiers were killed, injured, or captured by mid-June. And that was reported by The Economist, citing leaked documents from the U.S. Defense Department. So much higher casualties than we'd even been told about, even with the Ukrainians reporting it. So it looks like it could be much worse, and we're just now finding out about that. So 41% said the number lost was shocking, and 39% said the number lost was expected, and 10% said, I really don't feel any which way. So on this one, I'll be honest with you, I knew the losses were probably higher than reported, but this is honestly shocking. It's getting up close to possibly 1 million people lost in the Russian military, also including injured as well. That is crazy to see. Those numbers are almost historic for the type of fighting that's going on right here. But the Enforcer can fill us in on the history a little bit better. But me personally, I was surprised to see that, just how high that number is. And it looks like a lot of other people were as well. But Enforcer, what say you?
So a loss that high would be pretty severe. We don't really see losses that are that high unless if it's a major conflict like a world war, to be entirely honest. To put it into perspective, the French lost, I believe, 1 million dead in World War I. Let me make sure. French losses in World War I. And let me see if I can make sure. Let's see. So in France, the total fatalities was 1.186, 1,186,000 killed or missing in action or died of wounds. Pretty much everyone who died or went missing, that was the total. And it is fairly high, but you have to remember that World War I was the deadliest conflict that ever occurred in really the history of France, because World War II, I don't think, came that close, at least for the French. I think it maybe been just a little bit below World War I, but nevertheless, that was one of the deadliest conflicts that the nation of France ever went into, and it was extremely bad. 1.1 million people dying almost broke France's will, really going on into the future. And so you have to think, the Russians, which are on a fairly interesting footing in the modern day, considering that their population is in an active state of decline, and not only that, it is due to pretty much the Russians doing the same meat grinder tactic for both major world wars and really creating this major generational gap, because there's not enough, I guess you could say, able-bodied men alive every 25 years to be able to birth a new generation. So every single time 25 years comes around, the Russians are really reeling, because there's just no one really being born during that generation that pretty much got wiped out. But nevertheless, one thing that I would have to say about that is that if that number is that high, 796,000, is that including the wounded as well?
Let's see here. Let me get back to the post real quick. Let's see. It said, I'm pressing the button the wrong way. Hold on just a second. Let me get back to the post. It is 728,000 at the high end, and that's including killed, injured, or captured by mid-June.
So including injured, that's actually not that much higher than the current public number that we get, because to go to today's really quickly, we'll get to the casualty report and actually cover it in detail. The Russians have already lost, according to the publicly released figure by the Kyiv Independent, 551,000 Russian soldiers wounded and killed. So it's not that much higher if we're going off of the high number. If we're going off of the low number, that actually means it's a little bit below the publicly stated number by the Kyiv Independent. But nevertheless, that is wildly high. To put that into a little bit more of a historical perspective, let me go and get y'all, let me see here, what would be, hell, there really is no major war that happened after World War II in Europe to really even compare it to on any kind of a scale. Maybe we could go with, well, those wouldn't even get close. When the world could I come up? Let's go with the Gulf War. That ought to be a good one. The Gulf War is always my go-to. When in doubt, go to the Gulf War. And so let me take y'all down to the casualties and losses in the Gulf War. Remember, folks, the Gulf War was the last major conflict of the 20th century. It really was. I mean, there was no other conflict that really got to the size or this scale on a conventional conflict in the 20th century beyond this point. 1991 was it. Really, it's been it since then. There's never been a conventional war this big since Ukraine. And the Gulf War only lasted about 6 months, 3 weeks, and 5 days from its beginning to the cessation of hostilities on the 28th of February in 1991. So going off of that, we can see that it's kind of shocking that the casualties and losses all combined for the Iraqis was only about at the highest end 300,000 wounded and killed over 6 months. And that was considered a steamroller because the amount of casualties and losses for the coalition was around 13,488. And most of those were actually coming from Kuwait itself, not really, say, the rest of the coalition that actually ended up conducting most of the ground and air operations during the Gulf War. If we were to only count the coalition casualties, which is where most of the losses came from during the Gulf War, only, let's see here, about 1,000 people were wounded and killed. 1,000 casualties, including the wounded and killed, that's what a casualty would be, versus about 175 to 300,000 wounded and killed in the Gulf War. And this was considered a sweep. By every single mean of the imagination, this was considered to be a slaughter on the on the Iraqi side. And yet, nevertheless, it's still not coming close even to the low-end number, according to the Department of Defense, of the wounded and killed that have been sustained in Ukraine by the Russians over 2 years, really 2.5 years at this point. So that's pretty crazy. Let me see if I can find a war that would be close on just one side. We're not talking about both sides combined, just one side. So let's see here. Casualties and losses. So the Korean War may be the closest one I can come up with. And we're just talking about the South Korean side, which includes the Americans that were wounded and killed, as well as the South Koreans, really the entirety of the United Nations that arrived in defense of South Korea. This is everyone who was wounded and killed on the South Korean side. And the Russian high end is just about 160,000 off of the total casualties that the South Korean side faced in the Korean War. Just to give you all an idea of how big this conflict is. Let me see if I can get y'all another war that would be comparable. The Korean War is one. I'll actually show y'all a war that certainly is not comparable, but just to give y'all an idea of the scale of some conflicts. The Chinese Civil War saw that just within the second phase of the Civil War, 2.8 million communist Chinese died. Just to give you all an idea. So incredibly, like wildly high. But nevertheless, just to give you an idea, it's incredibly high. And so going off of that, I would say that it's very shocking to see, because this is probably this is by far the deadliest conflict to occur since the Gulf War, and the deadliest conflict to occur in Europe since the Second World War. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, at least from what I can get and what I could gather and what I can quickly put together, at least on a historical context. And also I saw that Reigns put 300,000 Serbs in the Croat War. I would say that, and I was thinking about including something about the Balkans, but then I decided not to because a lot of those deaths were largely civilian, and we're trying to talk about combatant deaths alone as far as what the Russians are taking. So including civilian deaths in the Balkans would be not really perfectly to scale because it would be including pretty much a lot of defenseless people that didn't really have a say in being there or were an actual combatant in the fighting. They just ended up kind of getting caught in the crossfire inside the Balkans. So I decided not to include that. So as far as combatants dying, this is the deadliest war since World War II in Europe, which is pretty wild to see, even on the low end. And also Paula McDonald said, didn't Mao kill 60 million Chinese? Actually, it was 40. But yes, he did. He did kill 40 million Chinese. But
that is insane, man. One guy killed that many people. That is freaking nuts.
Yeah, and then people act like Hitler was a genocidal maniac. He was, but then people just forget about Mao, like, which is crazy to me because Mao, I guess, was forgotten because it was a party policy that went badly. Look at this, dude. This was okay. So let me put this picture into context. So the Great Leap Forward, just to explain to you all this what we could call a genocide, because it was one, was Mao's idea of rapidly industrializing communist China to the level of the Soviet Union within just a matter of a few years. So what Mao did, well, what Mao said is, oh, like agriculture, it's not that big of a deal. Industry is the way forward. Yes. Industry is the way forward. So the farmers need to set up smelteries, like actual steel foundries out in the countryside, and they need to make steel. And so then the party officials were like, well, where will they get the iron to make steel? And Mao said, oh, that's simple. The farming equipment. Just take the farming equipment and throw it into the smelter, and we could make steel that way. So then the party officials, because they didn't want to say no to Mao, it wasn't like, let me explain this really quickly. Mao wasn't necessarily like Stalin to the point that he was feared because he would kill you. He was actually like, China is a very interesting place because much like Japan during World War II, being dishonored or humiliated was worse than death to a lot of party officials. And so when Mao said that, they didn't want to butt him because they were scared he would make them look like an idiot. So instead, they just went, oh, okay, yeah, sure, yeah, we could do that. Yeah, we could turn that into steel, no doubt. So they would have the peasants here, as you can see right here, set up these giant foundries out in the middle of the countryside, and all of these farmers and peasants would take all of their agricultural equipment that was made out of iron, which is literally everything they need to grow crops and cultivate them, and they would throw them into these foundries, and they would melt them down. And what would come out of these foundries was absolutely nothing usable. Like, you could already tell that coming around the corner. Metallurgy is a very specific science. You just can't have a whole bunch of peasants throw iron into a fire and then hope that it turns into steel. You just end up melting everything and you don't even get anything usable out of it at all. So, because of that, and also because of something else that happened, which ended up biting them in the ass at the same time, and I'll quickly backtrack on that one to explain this. So, sparrow, do you know the bird, the sparrow, Matthew? Like the bird? Let me go.
Yes, the sparrow.
So sparrows are very common in China. I don't believe it's this particular kind of a sparrow, but they have sparrows in China, and they had a lot of them way back in the day. And so when the Communist Chinese took power, they said, oh, the sparrows are the plight of the workers. They eat crops. Kill them. And so the Chinese people went on a revolution against the sparrow and ended up killing all of them. The sparrow practically went extinct in China for decades after this.
They did that against actually several animals, didn't it? That wasn't the only one, I don't think.
But the sparrow was the most important one, and I'll explain why. The main food of the sparrow, and the sparrow was the majority, well, pretty much the only species of bird that was incredibly voluminous in China that had this as their main diet. The sparrow ate insects like locusts and other kinds of, I guess you could say, virulent bugs that would eat crops. And so when the Chinese killed all of the sparrows, there were no birds left to eat the bugs that would eat the crops. So then, when the Great Leap Forward was going on, guess what happened? A locust plague at the exact same time. So not only are the farmers completely deprived of agricultural equipment at this point to really harvest any crops, the locusts are eating all that's left. And so then the Chinese government, well, the party officials, the lower party officials that were actually in charge of the different provinces, started to notice that the grain reserves, really the food reserves, were starting to run low even in the first year. But they didn't want to report that back because they didn't know if their province was the only province that was having this problem, and they didn't want to look bad. So what they would do is that they would actually take the grain and they would pay the tributes that they were supposed to pay to the central Chinese government, because that's kind of how they paid taxes in China for the provinces, was just taking the production that they had and then giving off part of it. And so by the next year, the Chinese people had nothing to eat and they had no way to grow any new food. And so the common people started to go into famines, and the Communist Party officials at the lower levels, still wanting to make sure that they don't look humiliated and also not wanting to make Mao look like an idiot by telling him it was a disaster, just kept on telling these people, keep running the smelters, you'll eventually get something usable out of them, and don't worry about growing crops, there will be food around the corner. We're just going to take what's left and we're going to give it to the Chinese government, the central government, so that way we don't end up looking like fools and embarrassments ourselves. And over that next year, in the next few years, 40 million Chinese people would die from starvation, from a famine that was pretty much state constructed, not by pretty much raw state dealings like the Holodomor was done by the Soviet Union, which was an actual deliberately state constructed famine against the Ukrainian people. This was more so an act of complete negligence and idiocy on the point of the Chinese Communist Party. And so at the end of it, it finally became so bad that no one could really hide from it. And so Mao then immediately started to reverse the Great Leap Forward. And of course, the damage had already been done. 40 million people had already died, but still.
Did they call it the Great Leap Backwards?
No, they still call it the Great Leap Forward in China. And it's absolutely insane, man. It's crazy. Let me see if I can find you.
The Great Leap Forward into famine, and then the Great Leap back to disaster. They tried to reverse what they did. It didn't work.
Man, and let me see. Oh, here we go. Here's some more pictures of people bringing stuff to try and make into steel. Like, this is how much stuff they were bringing. They pretty much brought everything made of iron in the countryside to melt in those foundries, and nothing came out of it good. They lost everything they had.
You gotta admit, though, like, even though they were, like, misguided and they really didn't know what they were doing because Mao wasn't instructing them correctly, they're very industrious. Like, the Chinese people as a whole are very industrious with whatever they do, and that's even showing in their economy today. Even though the economy is not doing too great money-wise right now, they're still very industrious, and that's why they're literally trading with pretty much everybody around the world.
Yeah, that's true. Also, here's a picture of the blast furnaces that they made to try and melt the iron into steel. A lot better look of what they actually appeared to be like. But let me see if I can get a picture. Oh yeah, here's some more backyard furnaces. You can see that they're not really uniform in quality or design. It was just like whatever the hell they could come up with. But let me see here. I'm trying to find something here. Oh, dang. There's a sparrow. There's a sparrows that they started killing. I'm trying to find some actual pictures here from the... Actually, they don't have any more. Like, it's just a whole bunch of text on it. But anyways, the times of Mao in China were incredibly weird. The Great Leap Forward was one thing, but the Cultural Revolution... in China. So let me go here. This one was also really weird as well. This is when you start seeing those very prototypical Maoist posters that a lot of people would associate with Communist China nowadays, with a little red book and everything. But this was a really weird one as well. And let me see if I can get y'all something on this. Where in the world's the mango? I've told you this story before, Matthew, haven't I, about the whole mango thing?
I think so.
So, dang, man, I don't think they have the... Here we go, mango fever! Here we go! So, at this point, the cult of personality around Mao had grown so much. Just to give you all a little bit more history about this time in Chinese history around the 60s, and then moving on as the 70s when we would finally end up becoming friends with China, thanks to Nixon going to China. Mao had built up such a cult of personality at this point around himself. That's why the Great Leap Forward happened, is because no one would butt him, because they didn't want to look like they were going against him. He had such a cult of personality that he tried a mango for the first time ever at this point. Like he had not had a mango, which is pretty wild. And so in 1967, he had a mango. and he was blown away. He was like, the mango is amazing. It's like a spiritual bomb. Like, he said something along those lines. And so the people just fell in love with mangoes. And there wasn't a lot of them in China. Mangoes are not naturally grown in China, so they kind of had to be imported. And so they would import these mangoes, and the party officials in the cities would take like this one mango around, and they'd parade these things around the city, showing it off because, you know, like Mao just loved these things. And look at this mango. Isn't it great? Isn't it wonderful? And so the people worship mangoes, like, no joke. They would fawn over just getting to touch the mango, like just put a hand on the mango. They'd be like, oh, I touched the mango. And so then finally this is how crazy it started to get. A dentist looked at the mango that was in this town, and it had been boiled several times so that we would kind of keep a little bit of its appearance and shape. He looked at it and he just said, nah, that's kind of lame. Like, I don't really think it's all that much of anything, really. And the people heard him say that, and the crowd beat him to death on the spot.
Damn, man.
Yeah.
I'll admit though, like that was probably the only thing Mao was valid for. Like mangoes are pretty good, man. I agree with Mao on that, but pretty much everything else, the all the killing and stuff like that, that wasn't too savory. I don't think.
Nah, not really. And you can also see the little posters that started to be made. This is actually a propaganda poster made in China about the mango, and this is how they present it. And people would come up and they would touch that mango.
This is crazy, man. I never heard, like, I thought I'd heard the mango story, but no, I haven't heard the mango story. This is freaking nuts, man. They're worshiping the fruit. Mao does not sound like he was very bright. He sounds like he was kind of dumb, actually.
Yeah, he was pretty stupid, man. I mean, like y'all, I cannot tell y'all enough, because I actually had to take a couple of courses in college about communist China, which I will have to give credit to college, because usually I didn't learn a lot. I would have to say that as far as college went, teaching me about modern communist China, I actually learned a great deal about them. Learned I would not be a big fan of living there, and I'm not a big fan of the ideology whatsoever. But let me see here if I can find the part about someone being beaten to death. Let's see here. Oh yeah, several months of mango fever followed as the fruit became a focus of a boundless loyalty campaign for Mao. More replica mangoes were created, and the replicas were sent on tour around Beijing and elsewhere. Many revolutionary committees visited the mangoes in Beijing from outlying provinces. Approximately 500,000 people greeted the replicas when they arrived in Chengdu. Badges and wall posters featuring the mangoes and Mao were produced in the millions. The fruit was shared among all institutions that had been a part of the propaganda team, and large processions were organized in support of the precious gift, as the mangoes were known. A dentist in a small town, Dr. Han, saw the mango and said it was nothing special and looked just like a sweet potato. He was put on trial for malicious slander, found guilty, paraded publicly through the town, and then shot in the head. So I got the part wrong about him being beat by the crowd. He was actually executed by the state. It has been claimed that Mao used the mango to express support for the workers, who would go to whatever lengths necessary to end the factional fighting among students, and a prime example of Mao's strategy of symbolic support. Through early 1969, participants of Mao Zedong thought study classes in Beijing returned with mass-produced mango facsimiles, gaining media attention in the provinces. But you can get an idea that this kind of stuff was just crazy. Like, you know, like whether I summarize it or not, pretty insane stuff. But just giving you all a little bit of a look into Maoist China, which was a really bizarre place. But still, I hope y'all enjoyed that little story about the precious gift. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well about that whole thing. But with that, we still have to talk about why in the world is the Russian war so deadly in Ukraine. And a lot of people are saying that's due to the human wave. And some people are saying that's due to the new use of drones. And some people are saying that's due to the rapid nature of fighting. And some others are a little bit unsure. But Matthew, what are people thinking about this deadliness of the war? Why is it happening? And what do you think about it?
All right. So, by the way, first off, all these options are actually valid. They're all reasons why the war is deadly. But the question is, it's so valid, man. But the question here is, what is the main reason? So, 69%, nice, said it's due to the Russian human wave strategy, while 23% said it's due to the new use of drones, and only 4% said it's due to the rapid nature of the fighting. And I would tend to agree with the 69%. It is the human wave strategy by the Russians that is causing Ukraine to have to take out more of them as they come at them faster. And that's as simple as it gets. They're having to kill more people because they're sending them in faster. So that is the main reason. But also, the secondary reason is, in my opinion, the use of those drones, because that is taking out people a lot faster because those drones sneak up on them and they can take out literally squads of people at a time if they're grouped together. And the Russians believe in two group and they love getting next to each other. So they take them out in hordes with those drones. So between the two, human wave number one, drones number two. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, I believe it's really because of all of them. The rapid nature of fighting that's always going on pretty much on every part of the front. There's not really that many quiet areas of the front line like you would see in World War I. Also, the use of drones and the Russians' use of human waves have been not really helping out with keeping the casualties low either. So I'd actually have to say, while this wasn't an option, it's really a blend of all three. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, it's now time for us to move on into a little bit of Dutch news on the Double Dutch bus, because we were able to hear that the Netherlands are going to be giving a Patriot system to Ukraine and 2 million euros to investigate crimes committed by the Russian military, which is great to hear, because The Hague is in the Netherlands, which means that they will be the best at investigating that and coming to a conclusion. Moving on from that, it's now time for us to get into Ukraine. We were able to hear that the Capital Air Defense report was really good, as 13 Shahed 136s were destroyed overnight. Incredibly good to hear and great to see. Meanwhile, moving on from that and on into the area of our location unknowns, we also get to see a British-supplied Spartan in Ukraine. Just look at that thing. Isn't that whack looking? And also, I like that guy's helmet right there. But still, pretty cool to see and neat to know that the Spartans are there. We also got to see a Ukrainian unit training on the M777. We see them now ready to fire, and they're about to send that thing. And there it goes. Really cool to see those things
Got some
firing.
pushback on it, man. Some recoil.
Man, they got that recoil on that thing. You know what I mean? And with that, that's the end of that clip, but pretty neat to see. And then we have the Russian casualty report, which was pretty freaking high. Ooh!
They got 16 Bobcats today, man. That's freaking crazy. That's one of the higher numbers I've seen in a while. And Miss Disa can probably tell us exactly where does this rank on the top Bobcat losses, because this is pretty high. I think the record might be like 24 or something like that. Some number pretty high in the 20s, but 16, that is nothing to scoff at. That is impressive. Also, once again, the troop losses are insane as well. But Enforcer, tell us. And also, Miss Disa said plus 21 special equipment is the record.
Dang, but that wasn't that long ago. It was on the 11th of June. So they're getting on up there pretty consistently nowadays. But 1,150 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 16 APCs, 50 supply trucks, 2 main battle tanks, 40 artillery systems, 53 drones, 1 cruise missile, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, and the 16 Bobcat skid steers. Overall, it was a pretty impressive day, and I gotta say that it's wonderful to know that the Ukrainians are continuing to inflict high casualties onto the Russians and making sure to make them pay fairly well. Moving on from that, and on into the area of Vovchansk, we have to get on into some Frontline news. We have so much to tell y'all in so little time, crazily enough. We have passed another hour and 20 minutes before we've even gotten to the Frontline news. That is starting to become fairly common these days because there's just so much going on, not only on the front lines, but out of the front lines. But we have to get on to mentioning the top donors of the stream tonight, because so many of y'all have helped to make this fundraiser possible and have helped to reach $3,400 raised, which is truly unbelievable and amazing to see that we continue to reach those amazing heights on fundraisers weekend after weekend. And we want to make sure to recognize the top donors. I wish we could call off every single one of y'all for y'all's support to this fundraiser, but sadly there are so many of y'all that we wouldn't be able to do that practically. So we only call out the top donors instead, but I want to make sure that before we even do that, a huge thanks to everyone who supported the fundraiser tonight, whether it be $1 or whether it be hundreds of dollars. Each and every one of y'all had y'all's impact on this fundraiser, and if it wasn't for all of y'all working together as a combined Lee Spring Army, these fundraisers and their accomplishments simply would not be possible. And so a huge thank you to all of y'all once again. But Matthew, who are our top donors of the night?
All right, so we got a pretty sizable list of top donors, starting off with the largest one so far of the night, which goes to Hal Rose, who put in a $333 donation, and that is massive. And like I said, the biggest of the night. We also have a $250 from Underwater Comms, as well as a $200 from Snow White, Just Chillin', as well as BC Skyman, James Hughes, and those are the $200s. Huge shout out to all of them as well. And then we have a $100 from The Enforcer, as well as John C., Old Warrior, Stephen Parallax, and an $85 from Richard Ham, as well as a $50 from Axel K, Gordon Peterson, Greg Carrier, Andy L, Dad Good, Mike Smith, and also Andy L once again, actually 2 more times. So that comes out to $150 for Andy L, as well as a $50 from Gene Kustra, Chuck U. Farley, as well as Andy L 2 times more again, Tuche, and that comes out to about $250. I'm doing quick math. And also we have a $50 from Bex Chitwood, as well as Carl Pattison. And like the Enforcer said earlier, huge shout out to everybody that donated. Of course, we only call off the top donors because the list would be crazy exhaustive and too long to read if we called off literally everybody. But all of them add up and they all count. So a huge shout out to everyone once again. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I got to say, once again, a huge thanks and a huge shout out to all of y'all. These fundraisers have massive impacts on Ukrainian lives in the war currently. And I got to thank all of y'all so much once again for y'all's incredible support to this fundraiser and helping it to get to the point it is, because its impact in Ukraine will be massive. And if it wasn't for the Lee Spring Army that's continued to do this incredible work and do these amazing undertakings every single day, we wouldn't have been able to make this possible. And so thank you all so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And Matthew, I understand that we also have a couple of questions really quickly to get to before we get into that Vovchansk news. So what do we got?
So we have a couple of questions right here. They happen to be right here in the spreadsheet. And it looks like the first one goes to Caviar, who says, do you think that Ukraine will be asked to join NATO at this upcoming 75th anniversary NATO summit? Because I think it's the perfect timing, if ever.
That would be a great time. However, NATO has already said just a little while ago that Ukraine is too corrupt at the moment to join NATO, and I don't think that that'll be changing that quickly, where they could say that Ukraine could join NATO. So I have a feeling that they're probably going to wait until the war is over, and maybe a little bit later on afterwards, for Ukraine to actually finally join NATO. But sadly, while this may be a good moment, I don't think it'll be happening right now. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least from what we know at the moment. And thank you for asking a really interesting question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this question goes to Caviar, who says, when do you think we'll start seeing American PMC/contractors in Ukraine, and in what function do you think?
That's a good question, because that's actually been brought up and argued a little bit about whether U.S. PMCs could enter Ukraine. It hasn't had any forward motion yet where they're allowed, but if they did, I have a feeling that they'd probably be pulling a lot of stuff, logistics, frontline fighting. I have a feeling they probably wouldn't be doing that too much. So probably logistics, maybe air defense, maybe security around key sites. Once again, air defense for the large part, and also defense against saboteurs. It could be stuff like that. I have a feeling that PMCs would probably exceed incredibly well in those roles, but frontline fighting would most likely still be kept to the Ukrainian armed forces, at least from what I would know. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and we are on to the final question of the segment, and then we're going to be getting on into the Vovchansk front and the rest of the Ukraine war frontline news.
And this one goes to Real Don, and he says, do you think the ammo storage crater will surpass the Beirut explosion?
I don't think it will pass the Beirut explosion. The Beirut explosion, I think, was the biggest non-nuclear explosion next to the Mont Blanc explosion that happened in Halifax, Canada in 1915. Also, some people are like, what are you talking about? Like, Halifax explosion? What the hell is that? You know what, Matthew? I think it's time for a rabbit hole. The Halifax explosion. This was the biggest non-nuclear explosion, I believe, that has ever happened in history. And let me type this in. Biggest non-nuclear explosion. Let's see. So largest artificial non-nuclear explosions. So, hang on, folks. What is the largest okay. Yep, that's it. The Halifax explosion, but it was actually in 1917, not 1915. Correction there. Sorry about that. The date was a little bit incorrect, but let me show y'all the town of Halifax. Here is the town of Halifax, Canada, as it appeared in 1917. Well, actually, this is 1900. Let me show you what the town looked like after the Halifax explosion in 1917. That's what it looked like.
Oh, wow. That's a big one.
It practically got nuked. This was actually the biggest explosion that had happened in the world before the explosions at Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the first atomic bombs ever used in war. This was the biggest one ever. And in fact, the SS Mont Blanc, which was carrying the munitions that exploded, I think, literally disintegrated. There wasn't even a piece of it left. Like, little pieces of it were lying around miles away, but there was nothing in the water anymore of the SS Mont Blanc. This was a pretty wild explosion. I believe this still holds the title for being the largest. I don't even think the Beirut explosion gets close to the size and scale and the damage of this one. And let me see here if I can show y'all. Here's some buildings in Halifax that were damaged by the explosion. And I have to remind y'all that this was truly just raw explosives. Nothing nuclear, nothing special about it. It was just explosives that blew up and wiped out Halifax. So let me see if I can find y'all the SS Mont Blanc. I think they have a picture of it. So let's see here. The SS Mont Blanc. Sadly, it doesn't look like they do. Where in the... Oh, here we go. Actually, here's a picture of the Mont Blanc. Let me see if I can get y'all a better picture of it. So that is the Mont Blanc as it is seen right there. That is the ship that blew up. It's not a big one, really. But it did end up blowing up one hell of a giant chunk out of Halifax. It literally blew the whole town away. And this is also a picture of the cloud from the explosion. And let's see. Estimates. Let's see. Looking down. Let's see. So apparently, this was 15 to 20 seconds after the explosion occurred, and the picture was taken about 1.25 miles away. As LSA Rocks throws in a $500 donation to the fundraiser, the biggest one of the night, getting it up to nearly $4,000.
Dang, huge shout out to LSA Rocks. That's freaking massive support.
Man, I'm telling you, that's crazy right there. Unbelievable. But still, getting back to the house.
Also, what year was his explosion, by the way?
1917.
Well, did they even have cameras in that? How'd they take this picture?
Yeah, they had cameras in 1917, Matthew. What do you mean?
What camera was it?
Dude, they had, like, cameras from, like, the 1840s, dude.
Like, was it, like, they weren't, like really, like, distributed or anything?
Dude, cameras were very common by this time in history, man. Like, they were everywhere.
Well, I mean, whoa. I mean,
I'm just kind of shocked, though, because I thought you knew that. Like, I was like, what? Cameras were everywhere, man. There are pictures. Let me go find them. Pictures from World War I. Like, they had cameras, like, lots of them. They took pictures.
I thought it was just like a couple of people had them, though. I didn't know like a bunch of people had them, where they could like take pictures of everything.
No, they had loads of them. I mean, they even had disposable cameras by this point. Let me go pull up the Brownie #2, which was a pretty common one, made by Kodak. This is the Kodak Brownie #2, which was actually around. Some of these were actually found on the wreck of the Titanic.
Oh, that's interesting. And when was this one made?
These were made right at the turn of the century, and up till about 1910, 1912-ish. These started to go out of style about the time that the Titanic was actually setting sail, but there was a lot of these around when the Titanic set sail. Some of them have actually been found, I believe, in the floating debris that was around the ship, and then on the wreckage when it was found in 1985, or at least remnants of Kodaks. I don't think there was a lot of them that were found at all close to intact, because I think most of the little sea creatures at the bottom of the seafloor ate the leather off of these things after they got down there. But still, there were a lot of cameras around. I mean, some of the earliest the photographs taken were taken in the 1830s. And so by this point in time,
I knew they had cameras. I just didn't think they had a bunch of them. Like, I didn't think a whole bunch of people had them. Like I said, I thought it was only like a handful of people. That's why I was wondering. I was like, how'd they take that picture? Because if what the person that had the photo or the camera must have been just the right place at the right time. But I guess a lot of people had them. I didn't know.
Oh yeah, loads, man. Like, loads of people had them by World War I even. And that's why so many pictures were taken in World War I. And that was the first war, like, you know, like how Vietnam was like the first war on TV, World War I was the first war seen in its nitty-gritty detail in pictures, and these pictures would be taken on the front line, and then newspaper publications would pretty much print the pictures one for one when they got back home, and they would put them in the papers. And that was really shocking to people, you know, because up until then, most wars had been really nothing but paintings, and while some wars, like the Civil War, they did have photographs in them, they weren't of frontline fighting, because back then the camera technology didn't really exist for you to take like a snapshot picture. But by World War I, that had happened. So then you were able to actually get frontline action pictures. And so let me go and put that back in. And let me show you here. Like, here's a picture of soldiers going over the top, like actually taken while they're attacking. Here's another one, once again, while they're going over the top. And the pictures by this point were actually able to get enough exposure in such a short amount of time, they could take a picture in the moment instead of having to have people pose for the pictures instead.
Well, that's interesting to see. They definitely didn't have GoPros back then, that's for sure, but this works.
Yeah, well, you know, GoPros, I think are a really modern thing. Like, I think
No joke.
just a century. I know a lot about camera technology. GoPros, man. Now I would sound like an idiot. I'd be like, I don't know, man. Maybe those things were like around like maybe the late 90s. I wouldn't know. But like, I'm sure that there was like a late 2000s kind of a thing heading into the 2010s, if I'm right. Like, Matthew, am I right?
I think you're somewhat right. I think it was somewhere around there, maybe 2008 or something like that. I'm not sure though.
Okay, so I was kind of right, but then I'm going to start sounding like an idiot, and you'll be like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean, man? But still, this, I think, was the largest non-nuclear explosion. So this Voronezh explosion probably isn't close to the Beirut one, but the Beirut one also isn't close to the Halifax one. But that Beirut explosion was wild. I mean, that one was actually pretty crazy. But with that, I hope we addressed that incredibly well. And with that, now that we're almost an hour and 40 minutes into the news, and we still have loads of news to cover, it's time to get into the frontline news, where we got to see today that the Sheikh Mansour battalion was firing grads at the Russians in the area. We see them getting out of the truck. We now see them getting the grad set up. This is a mini grad, by the way. It's one of the smaller ones. Also, I saw someone in the chat. Let's see here. Who was it? Let's see. Oh, Kaltenberg said, there are Civil War photos of fields of dead. Yes, but the reason why those could be taken is because the dead are perfectly still, and by that point they've gone into rigor mortis, so they're really still. And so you could get out a camera and you could take a picture, and you could guarantee that they weren't going to move. So the after-battle pictures were very common, but the in-battle pictures did not exist. And they still had to have sketch artists to do those during the Civil War. Also, another thing that y'all may not know, I'll share with y'all something a little bit more about Civil War photography, is that they actually would pose the bodies. Like, they would go out there to the dead bodies that were laying in the field, and they would pose them certain ways so it'll look better on camera. So the photographer would get out there and be handling dead bodies to make it look a little bit better. When we see them continuing to adjust their fire, we now see them firing off a small barrage. And we now see them running back up to the small grad that they have, probably getting it ready to move. We now see them watching for the impacts in the distance.
Somebody's calling somebody up.
Beep, 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 beep. And I think the impacts are right up here at the top of the screen, if I'm seeing this right.
The hell of a beard on that guy. He won't be able to put on a gas mask if he wanted to.
Dude, he could just put that beard over his mouth and breathe. I think he'd be
Yeah,
fine.
really.
Like,
Man, he's not sacrificing that drip. You know, he's got to have that style. You can't sacrifice it for the gas mask.
man, sometimes you got a style on them. You know what I mean? But we see them rolling on along. Almost getting hit by a tree right there. Mr. Dio said, Stalin was worse than Hitler. I'd say all of them are, of course, the most evil people in the world, but as far as the amount of people that have been killed in genocides and who becomes the worst because of that, my ranking is actually number 1, Mao, number 2, Stalin, number 3, Hitler, number 4, Pol Pot. That would be my rank for the out of the worst, which one's the worst, and then which one is the least worst but still the worst. That would be my ranking. Do you know who Pol Pot is, Matthew?
Yes, that's what I created for night. When I create the poles, I put them all in the pot. Pole pot.
I mean, that's a good one, man. Oh, man, he was a Cambodian dictator, dude. He actually loved to bathe in the blood of people. So he'd have a whole bunch of people killed, and they would drain their blood into a bathtub, and he would bathe in it because he believed it kept them young.
Sounds kinky.
What? Like, what? Anyways, moving on.
AKA sounds wrong.
All right, I'm glad you corrected that because I was like, what? Huh? I was like, wait a minute, hold up. But anyways, we got to see a Buldana in action in the area as well. I'm having a blast with the stream tonight, if y'all can't tell. I feel a lot better. By the way, a lot of people have been wondering, how about the headache? The headache did go away, thank the Lord. So I'm feeling a lot better tonight, back to normal. But moving on from that and into the northern area, we also got to see photos of some destroyed Russian positions. According to the Russian that put this out, 20 FPV drones arrived pretty much in a swarm and ended up taking out these people. So pretty nice to see. Like to see it. Moving on from that and down to the area of Avdiivka, we also got to see that a Russian electronic warfare team also got destroyed today as well. Now we're going to be muting that. And D. Henry said, that's creepy. Oh, you ought to know what else the guy did. It was so bad Vietnam invaded Cambodia just to throw him out of power because he was that evil. Like, he was so evil that even another communist country looking at this communist country said, that's so bad we've got to intervene. Also,
man, that guy sounds like a crazy nut. Like, you just don't understand what depravity people are capable of until you put them in an environment like that guy, like Hitler, like Stalin. It's like, how do people get to the point where they're willing to go and like torture people and do terrible things to people like that? It's like, how do they get there?
Well, I would actually say, if we're talking about a per capita or per 100,000 level, Pol Pot probably ranks as the worst dictator or genocidal maniac in history just by the percentage rates, because under his short reign in Cambodia, 25% of the entire population was dead by the end of it.
But like, why though? It's like, even I understand they all have ideology that drives them, but even at that, it's like, how do you like, and they have to be psychopaths. First of all, it's like a sub requirement to be a psychopath, because even if you truly believe in what you're fighting for, why would you resort to like doing stuff like bathing in other people's blood and stuff like that? Like, that's just crazy.
Oh man, I mean, I would highly encourage you, Matthew, to go watch videos, documentaries about Pol Pot, because it was literally like American Psycho or American Horror Story or whatever that show was, brought to life in Cambodia. Like, if you wore glasses in Cambodia, you would be executed. Like, that was a law. If you were found wearing any kind of prescription glasses, or any glasses for that matter, they would immediately shoot you on spot without a trial or anything. Like, and the explanation behind it was incredibly bizarre. They said something like it was a bourgeois thing to wear prescription glasses, so you just get shot on the spot. So a lot of people ended up just dying because of that, because they were wearing glasses. It was a weird time. It was a weird time in Cambodian history, but luckily they got over it, thankfully. But we can see these Ukrainians here doing some work right here. Check this out.
Man, he's that one troll. Chris Thompson came in here and said, "You guys are dumbass." It's like, what the
No,
hell?
man, he said...
Man, I'm not even going to lie. I can't even get mad about that one. That was honestly just so, like, blunt and
Keep it.
direct. I honestly had to giggle about that.
Dude, he said, you guys are dumb ass-is?
No, not.
No, you. You can see the Ukrainians firing on the Russians. Look at them go. Ooh.
Oh, some fire.
And with that, that's the end of the clip right there, but still pretty wild to see. But moving on from that and out of that clip, and a little bit further on down the line, we also got to see what an average day in the 30th Regiment's looking like these days. I wonder how they're doing. Let's see how they're doing.
А нахуй ты сюда шел, ебаный ты чак, блядь! рэп включить, когда туда группа заходит? Что? Когда группа заходит, нельзя рэп включить. Можно, включай, блядь. А что? Нихуя не включай. А что такое? Вы когда, блядь,
Seems heated.
потом зажги туда, нахуй, моя на птичку наступить, а не мимо. Да? А что, будет, все, Буча пошла? Да.
They're fighting for the mere basics.
Буча пошла, да?
I don't know what they're fighting about, but it's pretty heated. And we just got the random wounded guy coming up out of the blue, still in the unit.
Я вас представляю родину. Кто не расписал? Кто не расписал? Расписывай. Да, отказывается выполнять боевую задачу.
And that's the end of the clip. But it looks like the days in the 30th Regiment aren't that fun. They're filled with arguing and anger. But moving on from that and out of the area and towards Bakhmut, we got to see a destroyed T-62M. It's about to happen. And there it is. It happened. Like, right there in the flash of an eye. Or the blink of an eye. Because our eyes don't flash. They blink, actually. But we can see that T-62M burned down. Isn't it wonderful?
It's wonderful anytime a Russian vehicle catches on fire. I love to see it. It's like a barbecue. Call it a Russian barbecue because they're cooking.
Aw, man. You know what else is cooking? Aw, man.
No, he's cooked. He's not cooking. He's cooked.
I thought he was cooking up that Peruvian below. But anyway.
No, man, he's well done. Finished. Almost charbroiled.
Oh, hello. But with that, we'll let this clip play. It's showing some Ukrainians walking around near the Chasiv area. But yeah, man, cooked to a crisp. Aw, man, I'm over in Europe now. It's time to stir up the beef. Aw, man, nice and good. Aw, man, no process server can hurt me now. Aw, man. Oh, man. Goodness gracious. Well, you see them just wandering through, showing off the destruction, of course. But that's the end of the clip, and giving us a little bit of a look of the surrounding area. Meanwhile, moving a little bit further on down the front, and past the Avdiivka area, because we really didn't get any clips or news there, we got to see that the 110th Brigade claimed that they shot down an Su-25 today, which is really nice to hear, and we hope they keep that up. But we have something even more interesting to show y'all. And it's right here. We're going to be muting the ultra dubstep, but what y'all are looking at is an ultralight and someone carrying a Ukrainian Malyuk bullpup rifle shooting at a Russian recon drone right there. And you can see them here flying around the plane as they keep shooting at the drone to take the thing down.
Did I see the pilot's wearing an oxygen mask?
I don't think he is. It looks like he's just wearing a normal mask, but here they go again. They're lining up on the drone again, firing at it. And it looks like they got it. Hey, look at that. That was pretty cool. But with that, we are now moving on from that little clip and on into our next one, where it was actually a little bit of a longer extended footage of the shoot down. And also, Don C., I can promise you, Pol Pot bathed in blood. Let me quickly Google that while we watch this clip right here. It's the same thing from earlier, but just lengthened. Pol Pot bathed in blood. Let's see here.
Oh, he was wearing an oxygen mask, it looked like.
Huh. That is really weird. Let's see here. Dang, man, I hate that I can't find this quickly. But I remember reading that he did bathe in blood. Some other people have done that in the past. Oh, look at them. They're dabbing up right there. Nice to see you. Some other people have bathed in blood in the past, but he was a guy who did it fairly commonly. By the way, a quarter of Cambodia's population died in just the short 46-month reign that he had as the leader of Cambodia. But we now see...
I'll be honest, man. I've been looking around, like, while you were mentioning that. I don't see anything about him reportedly bathing in the blood. I've seen him, like, doing some horrible things to people, like, terrible things. But the blood thing, I don't see.
I'm going to have to look for that a little bit more. Let's see. Pol Pot atrocities. Let me see if I can find that. Let's see here. Cambodian genocide. Yeah. Let's see here. The Civil War. Mao era. Let's see. I'd be danged. Let's see here. Just letting you watch this clip. I'm trying to find some more information on this. Dang, man, it is hard. Like, let's see.
Don C. said he was bad, meaning Pol Pot, but Elizabeth Bathory was the bloodbath creep.
Interesting. I'm going to have to look into that a little bit more, Don C., because now that I'm looking, I can't really find anything easily about the bloodbath thing. So I'm going to have to go and try and find Elizabeth Bathory and try and find the bloodbath thing there. But there's been a lot of weirdo freaks throughout history for sure, like an insanely high amount.
Undoubtedly.
But with that, that's the end of that clip. Really nice to see them shooting down drones with pretty much an ultralight. And also, something really interesting I wanted to show y'all was a video of the Frontline from space. This was a very interesting thing to look at. Just to show y'all this is what Ukraine looked like, southern Ukraine in the Zaporizhia area before the full-scale invasion. And what's really interesting is that you can actually see the active front line over here on the right side of the screen, because there were no farm fields that were active in a very big strip over here. That's where the front line was from about 2016 to 2022. This is what it looks like from space now. That's what it looks like. This entire area that's not being cultivated and farmed is where the active front line is inside of Ukraine. In the southern area, that is occupied Ukraine by the Russian Federation. And right down there, that's actually Mariupol. And the Azovstal is right there with a mouse cursor circling. The northern side is still being controlled by Ukraine. And somewhere in the middle, in no man's land, the Ukrainians and the Russians are fighting for control of the entire nation. It's pretty wild to see that in this form. Really, really weird to see the before and then the after right there. I mean, it's actually whack. But moving on from that and on into our next clip of news, we also got to see the destruction of a Buk surface-to-air missile system in the area as well today. And it got blown up right there. It was actually pretty violent, pretty quick, but it was gone pretty fast. Moving on from that and into our next bit near Voronezh, we also got to see a BMP hitting a mine, which was pretty impressive. Oh! And it's gone.
Oh, BMP, it tossed something into the air, Bliat. I don't know what it was, but it went high.
And that's the end of that clip, but still very nice to see. Moving on from that and down into the area of Melitopol, we also got to see that an airfield was apparently on fire in Melitopol today, but we've not been able to get additional information and really report on that a lot or say what it really is at this point with any kind of certainty. And so with that, we're now moving on to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 865 of the war. And so, without further ado, here is the speech. And let me switch it from audio track from Ukrainian to English. And without further ado, here is the speech. Speech!
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці, українки. Сьогодні в Одесі, в День наших військово-морських сил, Збройних сил України. І це день і нашої вдячності усім воїнам ВМС, і перемовин, щоб Сили оборони України, ВМС України, вся наша держава отримала ще більше можливостей. Сьогодні тут, в Одесі, були нові міністри оборони і закордонних справ Нідерландів, а також новий міністр оборони Британії. Поінформував їх про ситуацію на полі бою, була доповідь від командувача ВМС Шпапи. Ми будемо зміцнювати український флот надалі разом з Британією, разом з Нідерландами. Є хороші нові деталі такої нашої співпраці. Говорили сьогодні про зміцнення ППО, це наш безумовний пріоритет. Я вдячний за готовність робити наступні кроки, зокрема по F-16. Звичайно, ми сьогодні мали честь бути тут. Я мав честь особисто нагородити наших воїнів ВМС, тих, хто проявив себе особливо. Серед них Герой України, молодший сержант Владислав Андрущенко та хлопці, які відзначені хрестами бойових заслуг, орденами Богдана Хмельницького та за мужність, орденом княгині Ольги відзначив сержанта Ірину Бовщик, бойового медика 36-ї окремої бригади морпіхів. Пишаюся кожною, хто дійсно змінює все для нашої держави, захищає державу, відкриває для України нові можливості. П'ється заради України, працює, здобуває нашій державі міжнародну підтримку. Кожен наш спільний результат, і результат в тому числі у Чорному морі, вигнання російського флоту – це досягнення багатьох наших людей, які не зрадили і державі, і собі. Слава вам усім! Сьогодні також відвідав наших воїнів, які проходять лікування і реабілітацію після поранень. Побажав якнайшвидшого одужання, подякував лікарям, медичним сестричкам, провів і нараду щодо ситуації в Одесі та в області, безпека, робота наших транспортних артерій, енергетика, соціальні питання. Ще одне. Я хочу особливо подякувати нашій 110-й окремій механізованій бригаді за ще один збитий російський бойовий літак на Донеччині. Вже 12-й за кілька місяців. Ваша влучність – це дійсно взірець. Молодці. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 865 of the News of the Wire in Ukraine. And with that, it's time for us to move on into the second segment of this stream, where we get to talk to each and every single one of y'all. And it is an incredibly fun time because we get to talk about anything and everything y'all want to talk about. Literally anything and everything. And I gotta say that it is absolutely incredible fun, and of course it's also wonderful to know that we were able to raise $4,000 flat so far on the fundraiser. $4,000 even. It's beautiful to see. Matthew, my OCD, it's whole now. $4,000 flat. Not a single dollar over.
4,000 flat.
Not a single dollar over, not a single cent over. It is $4,000 flat. Really nice to see. We love to see it, and for that reason, it's time to talk to all of y'all. But Matthew, do we have any other top donors that we need to shout out before we get into talking to everyone?
So believe it or not, we are fresh out of top donors. But everybody tonight is a top donor because we are at 4,000 flat, which is 1,000 above the goal, which is tremendous to see.
And I've got to say, that really is tremendous. And so with that, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so it's now time for the final question segment of the stream, and we have no polls to address. Y'all might have noticed we had no polls since the last one. So with that, we're jumping right into our questions for the night, and we have our Morse code decoders to go over first. And tonight we had Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Paul Schultz, Kevin J, Rumpelstiltskin, and David Millsaps. And they said the LSA Signal Corps reports the Morse message is Russia losing more ammunition in that explosion than America did in Vietnam. LLT, LSA, the Marmot FOB confirms.
And that is the sound of money, and y'all got that down on the nail. That was the Morse code message tonight. I gotta congratulate y'all for that. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I feel like it's a good one. And I gotta thank y'all for getting that Morse code message correct for 865 days now, because y'all continue to just set the record straight on what Morse code deciphering looks like. Really impressive stuff. I got to congratulate y'all again for that. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our first live chat question here is going to go to Mr. Shipwright, who says, does the Russian anti-air not have an IFF, meaning identity friend or foe, system?
For all we know, it most likely does not. The Russians probably have some sort of a very archaic version of an IFF, but we do not think that they do, because friendly fire incidents have happened quite frequently throughout the course of the war by really a myriad of air defense systems, and so we're believing at this point they probably don't have any kind of a competent or usable IFF to speak of. Friendly fire did happen during the Gulf War, and we also had IFFs, but it happened a lot less and a lot less frequently than it has with the Russian Federation. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least the best I can off of my knowledge, Mr. Shipwright, and a very interesting question indeed. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to AF Kaplan, who says, in light of China having joint military drills with Belarus, do you think that Ukraine will continue to court China as an ally?
Good question. Reread it again, Matthew, so I can think about it.
AF Kaplan said, in light of China having joint military drills with Belarus, do you think Ukraine will continue to court China as an ally?
Yeah, I think they will, because they've already been doing that, knowing that the Chinese have provided things like Desert Cross UTVs to the Russians, and they still continue to try and court the Chinese. So I have a feeling that that probably will not sway Ukrainian decision-making one bit as far as trying to have a friendly relationship with the Chinese. That personally, like, just to tell you all my own personal opinion on that, that aggravates me greatly that that's the answer that I'd give. But based off of what I've seen, I have no reason to think otherwise until the Ukrainian government does otherwise, and then I'll be pretty shocked. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and we've got a question here from Mason, and he's concerned. He says, anyone please answer this. He said, do we think we will be dragged into an actual war soon with troops on the ground and such?
I don't think so. Not here in the near future. Probably within maybe years, maybe within the next decade, but I don't think it's going to be within the next few years, because right now we've done fairly well at making sure that we're a step or two removed from the Ukraine war directly, and I don't think that the United States is ever wanting to get directly involved on the ground or is ever really aiming for that or vying for that. So I would say for that point, we will not be in a war in Europe, probably anytime in the near future. On the other side of the world, we'll probably not be at a war with China in the near future over Taiwan or anything similar, because Chinese naval abilities, Chinese amphibious landing abilities in the Navy have not matured enough for that to be successful or a viable option for the People's Republic of China. So an actual conflict or a war concerning Taiwan would probably still be many years off, as they still do not possess the capability to actually be able to launch a successful ground invasion of the island of Taiwan. So I would say that we're probably not going to be in a war anytime here in the next few years. It probably would be a pretty good ways down the road, maybe another 7 to 10 years, in my opinion. And if it happened any quicker than that, I'd be quite shocked. And there probably would be some glaring deficiencies or failures of our adversaries if they were to conduct any kind of a conflict here in a very small time frame. So I would generally say no. I do not believe that a world war is going to be happening anytime here within the very near future. And so with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next one here is going to go to Jeff Veeder. He says, when do you think that Ukraine will start taking back sizable territory?
I think that Ukraine will start to take back sizable territory when the Russians financially collapse later at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, or they run out of oil, or they run out of military equipment, which any or all three of those will allow Ukraine to start making massive battlefield progress against the Russian Federation. So in my opinion, I would say that's probably going to be by the end of this year or the beginning of next year. We'll see that the Ukrainians start making a lot larger gains in ground, but it's not going to be anytime soon, and it's not going to be because of superior cunning and strategic or battlefield planning on the side of the Ukrainians, because I believe militarily it's largely a stalemate at this point in between the two sides. It'll take something crumbling at the home front in Russia for Ukraine to really be able to have a lot of frontline progress. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next question is going to go to, let's see here, John, who says, do you think we'll ever see Putin bow the knee to the president of China? And John, we've actually already seen that, believe it or not. Enforcer, I actually got a picture of him bowing the knee to Xi Jinping, and it's in the Discord DMs. And also, real quick, there's nothing sensitive in there, so you can feel free to go on there and pick it out.
There he is. Look at that.
Oh, look at that. Putin and Xi together again.
You know, I heard that Putin actually learned this little move from Monica.
Man, he learned that from Hot Dog Man.
Oh no! Oh man! Yeah, he's already literally bended the knee to Xi Jinping, and we already know that because of the Tucker Carlson interview. He's also bended all of Russia's knee to Xi Jinping, because y'all remember that prophetic statement that Xi Jinping just had to start making in the middle of his speech, where he said, "America is weak, the dollar is dying, bled. The Chinese are the only way forward, the only people with a good reserve currency." And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? I was like, where are you coming from with this? But yeah, he has bended the knee 100%. I would say without a doubt. And so with that, I hope that doesn't answer your...
And also, by the way, people are asking for context on this image. I really don't know what was going on in this image. Obviously, it's not what it looks like, I don't think, because it's right here in the middle of like a bunch of people. But I don't know what was really going on with this, because Xi was actually leaning over, as you can see in the photo, and Putin was doing something. Honestly, I have no clue.
Honey.
But Winnie the Pooh, dear. I don't know what's happening, but we'll just have to leave that to speculation.
I'm telling you all what, it appears that, well, we're just going to leave that to speculation. I think I can't even make a joke on that without that going too far. But anyways, honey. But with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and this one goes to Xi Jinping, who says, will or can Ukraine modify anti-tank mines as disc grenades?
Oh, they already have. They've done that. We were getting a lot of questions tonight where we're just like, oh, they have done that. We have seen that Ukraine has actually made the TM62 anti-tank mine a couple of times into a demolition charge with a fuse. So what the Ukrainians will do is they'll lug this anti-tank mine with them up to a Russian position. They'll engage the Russians. They'll pull out the TM62, and it has a fuse on it like a cartoon bomb. They'll whip out a lighter. They'll light the thing, and then they throw it in the Russian position, and it blows up. And it takes the Russians with them. So yes, we have seen them turn an anti-tank mine into a actually usable grenade. And it has been wildly successful from what we can tell. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Very good question, though, and I hope that that does bring you up to speed on how the anti-tank mines are starting to get used nowadays, because it's really versatile, actually, how they're using them. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and this question is going to go to Ambi, who says, what happened to General Popov in his corruption trial?
Oh, he got put in prison. Like, he was found guilty and put in prison for a couple of years. That's why you'll stop hearing about that, because it's over. Like, he's been found guilty. He's in prison now. So that's what happened to Ivan Popov, who was the commander, I believe, of the 6th Combined Arms Army in southern Russia, in the Zaporizhia front. And he was removed because he spoke out about the massive corruption in the Russian military and how it was hindering Russia's true abilities. If they were able to get rid of the corruption in the military, they would be doing so much better. Because he said that, they removed him from his position, and then a little while later, because he didn't stop saying it, then they tried him for some made-up charges and then threw him in prison. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are moving on to the next one. Before we do, I actually saw that GHJKLZ said, for me, it's talking about the genocidal maniacs from like worst to least worst. You know, all of them are bad, but you know, which one is worse than the next? He said that 1 was Hitler, 2 was Stalin, 3 was Mao, and 4 was Pol Pot. I would say that's a very interesting way of looking at it. I think you're looking at it more so about who is believed in the modern day to be the worst of the worst. And everyone always believes that Hitler was the worst genocidal maniac there was. And he was bad. Now, don't get me wrong.
He was very bad. Very bad.
11 million dead, you know, that speaks for itself. But the thing to me, though, is that it's not necessarily about the motive behind a genocide that makes one worse than the other. It's really the number of people killed. Because when you look at them all, Pol Pot, I think, killed like 5 million, which is really bad, but that's not really that up there. So he would be number 4 on my list because he killed 4 to 5 million, which is pretty bad, but, you know, still not as bad as the others. Hitler then killed 11, so he would be number 3. Stalin killed somewhere around 23 to 25 million. The number isn't even really that clear on that. And then Mao killed about 40 to 50 million. So in my perspective, it isn't necessarily about the motives behind a genocide. It's about the absolute destruction and death or loss of human life that's occurring in a genocide that really ranks them from worst to the worst to me. And so Mao will always be the number 1 worst genocidal maniac or dictator in world history to me, because he was the one who ended up killing the most people by his own hand, by his own orders. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, but a very interesting way to categorize that. But it's still, all of them are insidiously evil. I mean, we're really splitting hairs about how bad any of them are, because it's like talking about Idi Amin. Like Idi Amin, who is from Uganda. Well, actually from, I believe it was, hang on. Idi Amin was Ugandan, right, Matthew? Or was he Rwandan?
I'll be honest with you, I've heard of him, but I don't really know much about him.
I believe Idi Amin, let's see. Okay, so he was Ugandan. He was pretty bad too. I mean, like, we haven't even thrown him in the list. He was a pretty bad guy as well. I mean, he was a genocidal maniac just like any other. And then the Rwandan genocide happened as well, which is a genocide like any other. Genocides are, of course, horrendous regardless of the number. Even the Armenian genocide, which was conducted by the Ottoman Turks in World War I, is a horrendous one as well. It's not really covered a lot. All of them are horrendous. And it's really even hard to really split hairs. It's really just on that basis, because every genocide is terrible. It's not like you can go, well, this one wasn't really that bad. All of them are really bad. You really have to, at that point, go, which one do you feel is the worst? And for me, I always just go off of whoever ended up genociding the most people. They're always going to be the worst, in my opinion, and then it will descend down the list from there. But, I mean, it's crazy to think about that, though. Numbers that aren't even mentally processable. Like in Germany, 11 million killed in a manufactured genocide by a state government. That is pretty wild to think about, because if you put that into perspective, and let me remind everyone, when America first gained its independence in 1776, there was only 3 million Americans living in the 13 colonies. The genocide in World War II killed 11 million people. That is around 4 times the population America had when it declared independence, which is pretty crazy to think about. And then when you think about something else like Stalin killing 23 to 25 million people, I believe that's the entire population of California, if I'm correct, just wiped out for no reason, really. It's crazy to think about that kind of stuff. And it's just wild to think what the wrong kind of people can do when they get absolute power in their hands. They can do absolutely horrendous stuff. But with that, I hope that does address that well. It's a really morbid kind of a topic to cover, without a doubt. You're talking about dictators and the kind of maniacal things that they did, but it's always something that has fascinated the public about these kinds of people and the kind of depravity and level that they'll go, just to make sure that they maintain power or keep a grip on things, how many people they will kill that might stand in their way. And it's really just bizarre. It's the craziest thing to actually think about. But with that, I hope that addresses that the best we can, although that's not really a good topic. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and this one goes to Caviar, who says, what happened to the problem with the rats in the trenches that you reported on last fall? And have any diseases been spreading from these further on?
I would say that the disease thing, it seems to have died down a little bit. We haven't really heard a lot about rats carrying diseases anymore. So I would have to say, I think it's just kind of ended up being a non-issue after we talked about it. I think it ended up being an issue for a little while, and then they fixed it, maybe through mass inoculations or something along those lines, but we don't really know what happened with the rat situation. We haven't really gotten enough news to get a clear picture on that. And also, everyone keeps on bringing up King Leopold in the chat. Yeah, that was bad. That was really bad. Do you know about King Leopold, Matthew?
No, I don't.
So let me tell you a quick story. Did you know that Belgium actually claims the title for being one of the worst genocidal nations in history?
No, I did not know that.
So way back in the day, there was this thing called the Race for Africa, or the Scramble for Africa, where many major European powers started to carve up the continent and try and gain zones of control. And of course, the British controlled most of East Africa, the French controlled most of West Africa, the Portuguese controlled modern-day Mozambique and I believe Namibia as well. The British controlled a good amount of South Africa, but then there was this giant area right here where the Democratic Republic of the Congo is today, and the Republic of the Congo, that wasn't claimed by anyone, and it was complete jungle. It was largely, it didn't look like it would be that successful for a major nation to own, so no one really claimed it. So King Leopold of Belgium, Leopold II it was, came in and said, would it be okay if we just took this? And they said, yeah, sure, you could take it. So instead of taking it for Belgium, and actually I don't believe Belgium deserves this credit, because this is actually a little bit of a caveat to the story. King Leopold II of Belgium didn't take this area as a part of Belgian land. It was actually personally owned by King Leopold II. So the entire region was just owned and controlled by him. And he ran it as a pretty cutthroat company. He forced all of the locals pretty much all of the native people in the Congo into slavery. Every single one of them, and they were forced to work in mines, trying to mine resources, valuable minerals, stuff like that. And he would end up treating them wildly poorly. He would end up executing a large amount of them, and I believe by the end of it, they said that millions had been killed. They don't even know how many. They said it could be anywhere in between, I think it was like 4 and 15 million, which puts him either right above Pol Pot at the lowest, or right above Hitler in the number of people that were genocided in the name of King Leopold II. So that is actually one of the worst genocides that ever happened in human history, and it's one that's almost completely forgotten about because King Leopold II was kind of an uninteresting person. And then, just as like a personal person, like beyond the genocide, he didn't really do anything of note. But he got so bad that I think by the time of his later life, the Belgian government and the Belgian people, because they had a constitutional monarchy a lot like Britain had, found what King Leopold II was doing to be so irreprehensible in the Congo that they actually seized it from King Leopold II and made it a Belgian colony from that point forward. And they say that the treatment was still pretty bad, but it improved, I think, under Belgian government control. But under King Leopold II, it was literally hell on earth down there for, I think, a couple of decades. But with that, I hope that shares the story of King Leopold II fairly well. Some people say that he is the worst, and it's really a matter of opinion when you're talking about people like that, which one's the worst and which one's the least worst out of all of them. But still, a really dark time in Belgian history, especially considering that it was a genocide by no means. It was completely a genocide. But still, with that, I hope we addressed that fairly well. Everyone keeps on bringing up different atrocities in the chat, but it was a pretty rough time. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and this question goes to Pixel Lord, who says, a question involving China, and this. Is this a case similar to the unconfirmed North Korea reports, or are these 100% verified reports?
These are 100% verified. We already know that a Y-20 has landed around Brest currently and is unloading a Chinese entourage from what we know. Yes, it is something that is 100% confirmed. The North Korean information, from what we also know, is confirmed as well for the large part, but we haven't seen any North Korean soldiers arrive in Ukraine yet to fully confirm the story and say that it actually happened. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Also, JC9 said the British India Company, the East India Company actually is what it is. Oh, that's actually a crazy story. But that's a story for another time. Because, Matthew, does this sound like hell, Matthew? If Amazon ran a country, does that sound like it would be hell to you?
If Amazon ran a country? Man, they're running this country.
No. Like, I'm saying, like, if Amazon, the company, was literally the government, wouldn't that sound like hell?
Well, I could get political here if you'd like.
No, no, don't do
Man,
it.
You're like tempting me with the getting political on this one.
Like, just say yes or no. I got to keep this a yes or no answer so it doesn't get political. Doesn't it sound
I
like
can't do it. I can't do it.
Okay. Okay.
It's
so
impossible.
So moving on from that, so that way Matthew doesn't get political. One thing that's really interesting about the East India Company, and a lot of people have heard about the East India Company, especially if you're from America or if you're from Britain or even if you're from India. But the East India Company was an actual company that ran the entire Indian subcontinent for centuries. It was a literal company for profit, which is wild to think that that happened. But that was a part of the British concept of corporations kind of holding a large amount of power, and it was a very interesting time in Indian history, to put it lightly. But the East India Company was wild. Like, it was very interesting from start to finish. It was horrendous in a lot of ways. It was also very interesting in others because it was truly like those movies from the 80s where, like, you know, like Wayland Yutani or something like that would own like pretty much everything going on in space. It was like that, but with a whole continent. Like, what if a company ran a country, and that's what it would end up looking like? But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Another cool, interesting rabbit hole. I'll cut that one really short, though. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Peter Summers. He said, I've been seeing a lot of videos on countries backing out of weapons deals with China, and have you been following this with Pakistan and other countries, for example?
I haven't been following that a great deal. Usually the Chinese do export a lot of their weapons, a lot like the Russians do, but they usually don't manufacture a lot of their weaponry anymore with the intent to export that much of it. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a J-10 or a J-20 outside of China. Of course, the J-20 would never make it out of China. It's a national security interest for them that it doesn't. But I have not been hearing a lot about that. So I'll have to be looking into that a little bit more, because nowadays the Chinese aren't really worrying about being an arms exporter like they used to be in the past for a money-making venture. They're more so interested in getting involved in the consumer economy side of things and really pulling themselves into a country that way. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Supernova, who says, thank you both for the amazing work. And thank you, Supernova, for the kind words on donation night of all nights. Thank you very much. They said, I noticed a hydrogen-powered ship in Norway with more on the way and thoughts. And LLT, LSA.
And thank you for the good question. Thank you for the kind words as well. Hydrogen-powered ship. Let me go look at this. This is it. It's a smaller vessel. It's a ferry, actually. And it's completely hydrogen powered by hydrogen fuel cells. So let's see here. Norway's zero emissions. Let's see, more than 80 vessels.
Wait, is this a military ship or a civilian vessel?
This is a civilian ferry.
I was about to say, because if it's military, I don't think doing hydrogen is a good idea, because you need to be able to transport it really easily. And I don't think hydrogen is that easy to, like, transport around, to my understanding.
And liquid hydrogen, that would be incredibly difficult to transport. It's interesting as a concept. I don't know if this is scalable at the moment. It'll probably require a lot more investment and research to make it scalable. But very interesting to see. Apparently, it's a zero carbon emission form of propulsion, which it's quite obvious it's hydrogen, so it's not really like it would be creating any emissions. But still, one thing that is interesting, though, is I believe liquid hydrogen requires a pretty in-depth process, or requires a lot of energy to create liquid hydrogen. So is it really net neutral, or is it just net neutral on the end of using it? Or is it net neutral on producing it and using it? Because if you're having to end up creating some sort of, because of the idea of this, because, and I'll say this, because the whole, this kind of starts getting into a little bit of a political thing when we talk about net zero emissions and all that. Whether you're into net zero emissions or not, I'm not here to talk about. What I am here to talk about, though, is that this thing has a project to be net zero as far as emissions. Now, if it requires a mechanical process that takes up a good amount of energy to produce liquid hydrogen, it's not truly net zero. It's just net zero when you're running it. It's like, for example, a Tesla, like a Tesla car, say it's net zero, sure, when it's running on battery power, but if the only way to get power for it is by using a diesel generator, it's not really net zero. It's just moving the carbon emissions or any kind of emissions over to a generator, which isn't the vehicle, but you still have to produce some kind of emissions to be able to make the vehicle usable. So in the end, it's not really zero emissions, it's just the emissions are elsewhere. So I would say on this, it's an interesting concept. I'm not sure if it's scalable, and I'm not really sure if it's keeping within its idea or its project mission of being net zero emissions. If they can find a way to make liquid hydrogen with it being net zero as well, then it's meeting its goal and it would be succeeding in its mission. But at the moment, I'm not really sure how they're producing the liquid hydrogen, so it seems as though it's in a bit of a gray area. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the third to last question of the night.
All right, and this one is going to go to Paddington. He said, I'll fill in Mason's question with something else. When, if they will, Western, let's see here. Paddington, I think there was a typo at the beginning. Let me see here. I think he meant to say, if Western units are deployed in an attack position in Ukraine, will it be months, days, years, or decades?
If you're talking about how quickly it would take for them to get into position, it probably, if we were just, like, best way I can say it, balls to the wall trying to get this thing done, we could do it in a couple of days. But if we're talking about the diplomatic ebbs and flows of the world and how long that would take, it probably would take months at the shortest, or for the longest, maybe even years if this war continued on well into the future for some reason. So if we were talking about on an actual practice level, a martial level, days. If we're talking about a diplomatic level of having to get to that level where that would happen on the martial end, it would probably be months or years. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Incasia 8, who says, I don't think Russia has the economy or hardware to invade another country. And what are your thoughts about Russia's true strength? Is it army or paper tiger?
It's a complete paper tiger. We knew that before this war began, is that it was a complete paper tiger. The main reason why I was a big believer of that even earlier on in the war was because of their performance in Georgia and also their performance in Chechnya as well after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the creation of the Federation. It's always been a really weak country militarily since the Soviet times. And so I would say that it's always been a paper tiger since the Soviet Union collapsed. May have even been a paper tiger during Soviet times, but thankfully we'll never know that because we never really saw them in a major conventional war. They only fought asymmetrical wars throughout most of their history beyond World War II. So I would say that it's, like they just were a paper tiger really from the start. That's really the best way I can summarize it because I'm trying to debate, should I go into a massive rabbit hole about that or not? And I'll save the rabbit hole. I know a lot of people love them. Some people hate them. So I'm going to save everyone from a rabbit hole on this one and just say they were largely a paper tiger from the start. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. Also, Indy 4C said 82nd anywhere in 48 hours. That is true. Also, the 101st Airborne, we can't go without giving them an honorable mention, can we? No, sir. The 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, or as they were called in the Cold War, the Chicken Men. And that's actually a good one, man. Do you know why they were called the Chicken Men?
Because they screamed.
No, because someone looked at that patch, like a glancing look, and someone said, hey, who are the Chicken Men? Like, no joke, someone just said that, I think, at some point in the 70s, like the very late 70s, and then it literally just spread from there and became a huge joke in the military in the 80s that they weren't the Screaming Eagles, they were the Chicken Men.
That's crazy. I'm not going to lie, that does not look like a chicken on that patch.
No, it doesn't. I don't know who the hell said it was a chicken. But anyways, moving on from that, let me see really quickly here if I can get you all their modern structure, because this is actually something really shocking about the modern 101st Airborne. If I'm correct, they are not an airborne unit like the 82nd. I think they're an air assault unit. Let me make sure that I'm correct in that, because that means that they're more so heliborne than ever getting like any jump training or anything like that. Let me see here. Where was their modern day structure? Should be around here. Nope, that's not it. That's not their structure. Where the hell's their structure? Come on, like. So hang on. Oh my gosh, man. Come on. So this was their structure in 1989, and you can see it was an entirely air assault division. It was not an air mobile one like the 82nd. It was an air assault unit, which is really kind of neat. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least from what I know. And also, let's see. Man, I think Doc Holliday, man, was one of Druggy's people. Like coming over here, I think he was. But anyways, I think
I just told him thank you, random YouTube person. LMAO. I don't even know who that is, man.
Man, I sat there. And
man, he's mad. He's if that is one of them, he's mad. He's like, I have to defend my savior, the hot dog man. And he came over here in a crusade and said one thing and got banned in 3 seconds. Man, you know it's got to be demoralizing.
Man, you know what's crazy though is that. Like, this guy will stand up for Hot Dog Man. Hot Dog Man would shit on his forehead in a second if he needed to. Like, it's like why you?
Oh, and he would take pride in it.
Oh yeah, he would too. He would make sure to go post that everywhere on Twitter, Discord, on YouTube, everything. It's like don't defend someone who wouldn't defend you. Know that. Like, but anyways, with that, I hope we addressed that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who was the lucky last person threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Destiny Edgington, who says, will Russia try to bring back horses and sword fighting?
They actually have brought back horses in some areas. Yes, that has happened. But sword fighting? Maybe. I mean, maybe. If they start running low on ammo, I wouldn't doubt it. But horses are actually not that far off. Like, they've actually done that a couple of times in the war, and we've seen it. And we were always like, wow, that's actually pretty desperate right there to be using horses because you've run out of mechanized or motorized equipment. So, yeah, they have returned to horses. Sword fighting, though, still a little ways away. Maybe another year. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And I've got to say a huge shout out and a thanks to everyone for raising $4,046 on the dot on this fundraiser for Nova Ukraine. That support is massive and helps out Nova Ukraine to continue doing their amazing work in Ukraine, saving folks' lives and making sure to help out in the war effort the best way possible. I got to thank everyone so much once again for watching. At the peak tonight, there was 6.6 thousand people here, and 43,000 people have watched this stream since it started. We are always honored and very humbled to be able to tell all of y'all the news, and if y'all have enjoyed, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you really liked it, make sure to comment on the comment section after this turns into a video. But still, with that, I thank you all so much once again for watching. Good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And with that, thank you all for another great stream. Today was a great Sunday night fundraiser stream with $4,051 being raised. It is tremendous to see, and no other YouTube channel raises that much money for Ukraine on a regular basis, and it's all thanks to the LSA for making it happen. So once again, huge shout out to you all for donating tonight. And with that, we'll see you all on Tuesday night for the next nightly war news stream. And if there's enough news to cover tomorrow, you'll see me midday on the short war summary. And I hope there is enough news to cover because I'm not making too many these days because there's a lack of news coming out during the midday at least. But with that, Slava Ukraine, Heroam Slava, get some rest, and good night.
The Lee Spring Army sends its regards